Captain Zhou looked at him and wondered, if it's not a wolf, what is it? It looked more like a shadow, the platoon member said. But at this moment, he exclaimed again, oh no, my silver snake is getting out of my range. He then chased after it and tried to keep within the control range of the nanorobotic, silver snake. However, his speed was way lower than his opponent's. Before he could even cover 2 steps, his neural connection to that silver snake was completely cut off. Captain Zhou's expression sank. He had not believed they would encounter any danger out here. But who could have thought they would lose a portion of their nanomachines less than 3 hours after entering the mountain? And they didn't even know who did it. And for what motive? If the opponent were a human, why did they want to steal the nanorobotic snake? As if they could use it after stealing it. Captain, what do we do now? Someone asked. Captain Zhou said with a cold expression, where did he run off to? To the southwest, that platoon member said. Give chase. Captain Zhou said, it's only one person, isn't it? Make a call to the next outpost with the radio. Tell them we've discovered a new target that might be even more important than the wolves. Let them know we'll be pursuing this target with everything we've got and will be disengaging from Operation Wolf Encirclement. In truth, this Captain Zhou was the only person in the platoon who knew why they had been deployed to the mountains. There was no hurry in trying to encircle the wolves. What was more important was to ensure they did not lose the nanomachines. Meanwhile, Ren Xiaosu had just received the nanorobotic snake, already in an idle state, from his shadow clone. He had thought it would take a nasty battle for him to get his hands on the nanomachines. But that would not have been worth it at all, and he still preferred picking them off the nano-soldiers who had gotten separated from their groups. But sometimes, luck could even make a person hand you a pillow right when you were feeling sleepy. Someone had actually volunteered to send some nanomachines his way. In just 2 seconds, the palace reset the nanomachines back to their factory settings by clearing the remote access protocol and executing a series of other instructions. The tiny, nanorobotic silver snake transformed back into liquid metal and melded together with the rest of the nanomachines within Ren Xiaosu's body. It was like the newly gained nanomachines had been handed to him on a silver platter. However, Ren Xiaosu was sad. The size of this silver snake was too small. It wasn't easy for him to control the shadow clone before finding this one snake. If he had to go and continue searching for more of them, how many years would that take him? No. A glimmer suddenly appeared in Ren Xiaosu's eyes. Lin Qi and the others kept going deeper and deeper into the forested mountains. However, they did not head up and were instead walking along the mountain pass down towards the valley. Captain, why don't we give up on the chase? Lin Qi said, a little worried. It's only a silver snake. I'm afraid something bad will happen if we walk too far. Captain Zhou shot him a look and said, if you're so afraid of death, why be a soldier? The wolf pack isn't in our direction, so what's there to be afraid of? Keep marching. As that was being said, a platoon member shouted, Captain, look over there in the valley. Everyone turned to look at the valley and noticed a shadow dash by. That person looked like he had been resting over there and wasn't expecting Captain Zhou and the others to chase him all the way here. Don't let him get out of our pursuit range. Captain Zhou ordered ruthlessly. In an instant, the remaining 4 nanorobotic snakes slithered towards where the shadow had disappeared. Simultaneously, the other soldiers rushed towards the forested wilderness as a silvery glow emanated from the blood vessels in their skin. Could the nanomachines be constantly running in their bodies and only needed a thought from their owners to instantly form into sophisticated support machinery that could aid them in achieving an even greater strength? Strictly speaking, these nanosoldiers' strength and speed had already exceeded that of normal people. They were basically superhumans created through technology. These nanosoldiers rushed across the uneven terrain as though it was flat ground. There were even some people who could leap across distances of more than 10 meters with a single leap. Endless gunfire rang out as they chased the shadow clone while concentrating their firepower on it. It was as though they were attempting to blast the shadow clone to shreds with their overwhelming firepower. But even if they were physically strong, they were still recruits who had not gone through firearms training. While moving at a high speed, they could not even manage the most basic of aiming. "Don't waste your ammo," Captain Zhou sneered. "Catch him first and take it from there." But during the pursuit, only the soldier controlling the nanorobotic snakes had suspicions. It felt like this shadow's speed was slower than when it escaped after taking away the snake. But since he had precious little combat experience, he wasn't willing to casually pass judgment on the situation. As they were closing the distance between themselves and the shadow clone, the silver snakes had already closed the gap. However, the shadow clone suddenly reached behind and took a swipe. No one knew what it was swiping at, but the shadow clone immediately picked up its pace and disappeared. The speed at which it ran off stunned Captain Zhou and the others. "How can that be a fucking human? Just what are you after? If you're so good at running, why didn't you run faster just now?" But a second later, the nano-soldier controlling the silver snakes caught up to the rest. He panted out, "This is bad." His nanomachines had been used to form the nanorobotic snakes for scouting ahead, so when the group gave chase with all their might, he fell behind their pace. Captain Zhou frowned and said, "What's the matter?" The nano-soldier said, sounding devastated, "The silver snakes have all been taken away." It was only at this moment that everyone realized it. Their supernatural opponent had only used this as a tactic to slowly pull the silver snakes closer to him so he could capture them all at once. Their opponent had been targeting the nanorobotic snakes from the very beginning. What the hell? Was he unsatisfied with how long it took to capture them one by one? Was that not enough to satisfy him? Captain Zhou stood atop a rock looking resigned at present. Before they even encountered any of the wolves, one of the nano-soldiers had already had their nanomachines forcefully taken away. Was it even acceptable for a nano-soldier to not have any nanomachines in them? Previously, he felt that using the nanomachines as external scouting equipment was a really good idea since it could vastly raise the efficiency of their reconnaissance. After this incident, Captain Zhou felt he would have to go back to the general staff to report to them that this method wasn't going to work anymore. There was someone who specialized in stealing nanomachines for fun. "Let's retreat," Captain Zhou said coldly, "we can't continue chasing him." After weighing the pros and cons, he felt they might suffer even greater losses if they continued the chase. They were obviously not on the same level as their opponent, so it was necessary to cut their losses as soon as possible. But right at this moment, wolves howled from a hillside not far from them. Captain Zhou's face turned gloomy. How did it turn out like this? The outpost the wolf pack attacked was very far from here. If this was where the wolf pack was active, then why was Ren Xiaosu's outpost unharmed? Captain Zhou thought about it for 2 seconds before saying coldly, "I'm afraid the scale of the operation at the neighboring outpost must have been too big. That's why the wolves were alarmed and came over here. We underestimated how strongly they can smell danger and keep clear of it." "That could be possible," Lin Qi said, sounding afraid, "so what should we do now? What else can we do?" "Rapidly retreat," Captain Zhou whisper shouted, "if you don't want to die, hurry up and get out of here. We'll head to the outpost. Who knows, the wolves might get attracted to those people. That's our only hope of survival." As they were talking, Captain Zhou reactivated his nanomachines and became as quick and powerful as a mech. When the others saw this, they stopped caring about other things and hastily followed suit. But not everyone in the platoon was equipped with nanomachines. The soldier who had been controlling the nanorobotic snakes roared from behind them, "Take me with you." Without any nanomachines, he was just a normal person. He had absolutely no chance to escape the pursuit of the wolves. As such, he required someone to help him if he did not want to die. But his comrades who had been addressing each other as brothers did not even turn around to look at him when they heard his shouts. This was the result of not having undergone any formal military training. In the face of danger, they were no different from refugees. Looking at his platoon mates running further and further away, this abandoned nano-soldier started getting desperate. He could already hear the wolves moving in the forested hill behind him. For some reason, he regretted becoming a nano-soldier. Although he would have become a refugee if he didn't become a nano-soldier, he might have been able to live a little longer. But right at this moment, he looked back and was stunned, because he saw not only the wolf pack, a young man was with them as well. The young man and the wolves were coming towards him together. The young man and the Wolf King were walking side by side while the rest of the wolves followed them. It looked like his standing in the group was very high. But wasn't this young man that Ren Xiaosu they met earlier at the outpost? Then Ren Xiaosu said, "Don't worry about them getting away. I've already calculated their speed and used the shadow clone to lead them here into the depths of the mountain. They're running for their lives right now with everything they have, but those nanomachines will run out of power in approximately 10 minutes. After that, those few dozen people will revert back to normal humans." Just as Ren Xiaosu had speculated, the most lethal limitation the nanomachines had right now was its energy source. By depending on a bioenergy source to charge, they were utterly unable to keep up with the rate of power consumption. Therefore, nano-soldiers were best suited for blitzkrieg, not conventional warfare. Of course, Ren Xiaosu was unsure if the Li Consortium had solved this problem internally yet. The Wolf King and Ren Xiaosu came before that nano-soldier, and the two of them communicated by guessing each other's intentions. That nano-soldier suddenly felt like he had already been forgotten by them at this moment. "Aren't you two looking down on me too much?" But why was this young man in front of him able to stand with the wolf pack without being harmed? Wasn't this unbelievable? Wait. Could the attack on the neighboring outpost have something to do with this young man? Suddenly, the Wolf King took a look at this nano-soldier and then raised its paw to prod at Ren Xiaosu like it wanted something. Ren Xiaosu's expression changed. "He doesn't have any more nanomachines in him, so I'm not going to trade him to you. Besides, I took the nanomachines that he used to have with my own method." The nano-soldier was stunned as he listened to Ren Xiaosu. He realized the shadow was Ren Xiaosu's doing. So that meant this young man was also a supernatural being. However, the Wolf King shook its head. "Well, I don't care." Ren Xiaosu took out a vial of black medicine and handed it to the Wolf King unhappily. "Whatever, I'm not going to argue with a wolf." When the Wolf King saw the black medicine, it became happier. Ren Xiaosu said, "All right, I'll go on ahead to give chase. Come to me after you've dealt with him." Ren Xiaosu then got ready to leave. The nano-soldier who was about to get left behind was terrified. "Don't go, we're both humans. How can you let the wolves eat me?" Ren Xiaosu turned around and said with a smile, "I'd rather dance with wolves than associate with people like you." After saying that, Ren Xiaosu left and headed into the forested hills. The nano-soldier could see the solitude and determination on the young man's back. In this moment, the nano-soldier figured out a lot of things. So when they said their staple food at the outpost was meat, they weren't actually lying about it. So the wolf pack had not attacked the outpost over here because Ren Xiaosu was there. That was all there was to it. And he noticed this person called Ren Xiaosu knew a great deal about the nanomachines. They had been wondering why that shadow was trying to steal the nanomachines. It wasn't like it could use them anyway. But he wasn't so sure anymore. As Ren Xiaosu walked forward, he heard a scream coming from behind him. However, his expression did not change much. Including the 5 silver snakes, they were enough to allow his hand to be covered with the nanomachines up to his wrist. There was still a long way to go before he could gather enough nanomachines to piece together a full set of armor. Lin Qi and the others were running with all their might through the forested hill. They didn't even care about their faces getting cut by protruding tree branches anymore. The nanomachines they had in their bodies were still not enough to support the entirety of their structure. So their skin was not that different from that of normal people. As they ran, Captain Zhou slowed down a little. Seems like the wolf pack isn't coming after us yet. Lin Chi said with a look of consternation, could it be that they didn't realize we were there? That's impossible. Captain Zhou coldly rebuked. There must be some other reason for it. A hypothesis came to Captain Zhou at this moment. He wondered if the wolf pack somehow knew the nanomachines had a limited duration of charge and was waiting until their power ran out before making their move. However, he immediately brushed off this idea. After all, how could the wolves possibly know something like that? There were not even many people within the Li Consortium's military that knew about this other than the nano-soldiers themselves. Lin Chi and the others had already discarded some of their supplies. They were not so stupid as to throw away their weapons. Instead, they got rid of their combat rations. But Lin Chi suddenly realized something. Right from the beginning, Captain Zhou had never opened his backpack. Currently, the silvery glow from everyone else's blood vessels was starting to dim. But that was not the case for Captain Zhou's blood vessels. Lin Chi asked, "Captain, is there some sort of charger in your backpack?" Captain Zhou gave him a look. "Don't ask if it's none of your business." In this time of danger, Lin Chi and the others were all hoping to charge their nanomachines as well. If they could, their chances of survival would be higher. So Lin Chi and a few others decided to ask Captain Zhou for his backpack after exchanging looks with each other. But before they could ask, chaos broke out in the forest behind them. Huge beasts seemed to be moving within it. "Damn, the wolf pack has caught up!" Captain Zhou shouted, "Run!" Who could have the chance to say anything at such a time? They could only continue fleeing for their lives. But when they realized the wolves had caught up to them and were already flanking them, everyone forced themselves to run even faster at the sight of this in fear of getting caught by the wolves. Several nano-soldiers whose nanomachines were almost dead started falling behind. However, none of their comrades intended to help them. They just got more and more desperate as they ran, to the point that some even forgot they had guns they could use to protect themselves with from the wolves' attacks. Ren Xiaosu hid somewhere on the hillside and watched, sighing. The Li Consortium had indeed sent them out here to die. If this group of nano-soldiers were made up of the Li Consortium's combat troops, there would have at least been some order even if they were retreating, not a total rout like what was happening at the end of the day. These were just normal people who happened to be able to control the nanomachines. Some of them might not even have willpower on par with most people. However, Ren Xiaosu was actually more curious about what an elite nano-soldier of the Li Consortium was like. Ren Xiaosu noticed something different about Captain Zhou. He discovered the power of his nanomachines did not seem to be weakening. Why was that? A moment later, the wolves suddenly converged from both flanks for the attack. They forcefully separated the group of fleeing nano-soldiers in two. Only now did the nano-soldiers who were under attack finally remember that they were still carrying guns. They immediately thought to shoot the wolves. But they turned out to be so stupid they even forgot how to disengage the safety on their guns. Some of them drew their sabers from their waists. The sword was a melee weapon the Li Consortium had specially issued the nano-soldiers so they could make use of their super strength when it became necessary. To these nano-soldiers, a sword was far more useful than a gun when the battle became a close-quarters fight. Ren Xiaosu looked at the saber in their hands from nearby and saw the blade was orange. However, the edge of the blade was silver just like the nanomachines. When the blade was swung at the wolves, the silver edge of the blade pulsed and felt like a ripple spreading outwards. Ren Xiaosu wondered if the edge was also composed of nanomachines. When one of the soldiers' sabers cut into a wolf's body, that wolf's abdomen was split open like it encountered a burning blade. When the wolf pack saw the power of this weapon, they stopped pushing for a frontal assault. Rather, they went in from behind to sneak attack. Captain Zhou, Lin Chi, and the others did not even turn around and continued fleeing for their lives. If they didn't think of something, they would die as well. This was also the case for Captain Zhou, whose nanomachines were still at full power, as he wouldn't be able to outrun the wolves. Who has the cluster grenades? Hand them to me! Captain Zhou roared. His life dangling by a thread, his commanding voice was even starting to sound a little hoarse. Someone's expression changed when he heard that. But our comrades are still behind us. Some people were still firing their guns within the wolf pack. This indicated that some of the people surrounded by the wolves were still alive. Captain Zhou sneered, if you want to sympathize with them, go ahead and save them. Otherwise, don't put on a false front with me. Didn't we already leave our other comrades behind to escape? No one made a sound. Still, someone could not help but comment, you're trying to blow up our comrades. Comrades. Captain Zhou gave a snort of disgust and said, you people are not fit to be called my comrades. Our platoon still has 10 cluster grenades. Hand them all over. With that, a few people took out several grenades from their backpacks. When Ren Xiaosu saw this from a distance, he looked disturbed. These people had actually brought cluster grenades with them. Although the wolves could withstand bullets pretty well, they wouldn't stand a chance against these grenades. If some of the wolves got blown up, wouldn't Ren Xiaosu fail his side quest? When he thought about that, he ordered his shadow clone into the battlefield. Ren Xiaosu also rushed towards the Wolf King at the back and shouted, stop giving chase. It's too dangerous. The majority of the wolves immediately stopped in their tracks. However, one of the wolves was in bloodlust mode. After biting several of the nano-soldiers dead, it was about to rush forward again. This wolf's social standing was second only to that of the Wolf King, and Ren Xiaosu often saw it standing guard by the Wolf King as well. It was basically the second in command. As a result, the shadow clone rushed in front of the wolf just as it tried to charge forward. The shadow clone picked it up and ran back to the wolf pack. That wolf got angry and kept roaring frantically. However, the shadow clone did not even care and just carried it away. The Wolf King's appearance changed when it saw the shadow clone carrying the wolf. This thing was that strong. Captain Zhou and the soldiers pulled the safety pins out of the cluster grenades all at once and were about to throw them at the wolf pack behind them. However, they were shocked to discover the wolves had already stopped in their tracks and were no longer chasing them. In addition, one of the wolves that had been bounding towards them was being carried away in the opposite direction by the corporeal shadow. Lin Qi and the others were all dumbfounded by the sight. What was the meaning of this? Why had they given up the chase? And why was that shadow stopping that wolf from charging? It wasn't that they were inexperienced and had not seen the world yet, but this sight before them was too ridiculous. Some of the soldiers were looking at the cluster grenades with smoke coming out of them and asked, should we still throw them? Throw them. Captain Zhou then tossed the grenade in his hand at the wolves. If they didn't, they would blow themselves up. But by throwing the grenades, they couldn't even blow up any of the wolves. Had these wolves turned intelligent? Loud booms thundered through the wilderness of the mountains, and birds scattered into the sky like a spiraling, dark cloud. The Wolf King silently watched as smoke, branches, and leaves were sent flying by the blasts. It knew about the firearms and explosives humans used and wasn't all that surprised. It looked at Ren Xiaosu and nodded its head at him as though to convey its gratitude. If not for Ren Xiaosu stopping them just in time, the wolf pack would probably have suffered major casualties. But of course, Ren Xiaosu could not say he had interfered only because of the quest. But actually, even without it, Ren Xiaosu would still not have stood by and watched. They were partners, after all. He looked at the nano-soldiers who had already been killed by the wolf pack. The silvery nano-machines were already starting to seep out from under the skins of the bodies. Ren Xiaosu counted up 9 nano-soldiers who died from the encirclement by the wolves in what was a fairly efficient attack. It was just a pity that they had allowed Lin Qi and the rest of the soldiers to get away due to the cluster grenades being thrown. Ren Xiaosu took out 9 vials of the black medicine for the Wolf King and said in a serious tone, "Don't use it too frequently." The Wolf King was silent. "It's time to go. Head deeper into the mountains this time. After this group of people get back, there will be a large number of troops coming here. When that happens, there will be real danger, Ren Xiaosu said. The wolf pack would only be safe if they hid deep in the mountains. Beyond the quest, Ren Xiaosu was also hoping that no harm would befall the wolves. Although the nanomachines were a priority, he believed he would still find a lot of chances to get his hands on them. On top of that nano-soldier who had been killed earlier, a total of 10 nano-soldiers had died this time. Ren Xiaosu took their sabers and put them away in his storage space. He was in no hurry to inspect them since he had to run back to the outpost. When Ren Xiaosu took a detour and returned to the outpost, everyone there had already been startled by the explosions caused by the cluster grenades. They were all standing out in the open space in front of the outpost and discussing what might have just happened. Ren Xiaosu took advantage of the chaos and went over to the group to join the discussion with everyone else. By the time Ren Xiaosu got back, Lin Qi and the other officers had still not made it back to the outpost yet. The off-road vehicles they arrived in were still parked there quietly. But it wasn't long before the originally dignified-looking nano-soldiers sprinted out of the mountain path. They all looked miserable and pathetic. They saw the outpost's soldiers chatting, and Ren Xiaosu was the first to rush over and ask, "What happened in the mountains just now? Are you all okay?" Although Ren Xiaosu looked extremely sincere, why would Lin Qi and the officers care to answer a refugee like him? "Make way!" Lin Qi sneered as Ren Xiaosu stepped aside for him. The outpost's soldiers watched as these nano-soldiers got back into their off-road vehicles and drove back down the mountain. Even though they didn't show it on their faces, people like Li Qingzheng could still sense the fear in them. There were more of them when they went into the mountains. Wang Yuji said, "I counted 48 of them earlier when they went in, but they only have 38 people now." Li Qingzheng nodded and said, "It looks like a battle broke out after they headed into the mountains. Was it with the wolf pack? Everyone, remember this carefully. We don't know anything about the wolf pack lurking around here, understand? All of us ate the meat the wolves brought to us, so it won't do any of us any good if this gets out." "Understood," everyone at the outpost said in unison. They had somehow become a group that shared a secret. In fact, psychologists had conducted studies into this a long time ago and came to the conclusion that people got closer if they shared a common secret. All of a sudden, Ren Xiaosu realized Hu Shuo had not stepped out of his house all this while. It was as though he wasn't interested in the goings-on of the outside world. But of course, there could also be another possibility, and that was Hu Shuo not wanting to break the status quo with everyone at the outpost. Actually, any smart person who stayed here for a few days would surely know there was something fishy about this outpost. How else could the matter of the wolves sending meat over be explained? What? Did the wolf pack have to pay a property tax to the outpost? That wouldn't be believable at all. But Hu Shuo did not seem too concerned about this and looked like he just wanted to spend the Lunar New Year here in peace. After Lin Qi and the officers left, no one else came to the outpost again for the next 2 days. If it was really as Hu Shuo had said about the Li Consortium wanting to gather real combat data, the Li Consortium's research laboratory was most likely working around the clock to analyze Captain Zhou and his platoon's data. But Ren Xiaosu knew that whatever would come could not be avoided. It was just a matter of time. He only hoped that the wolves had already taken the rest of their pack far away from here. Hu Shuo continued holding classes as usual for Ren Xiaosu and the others during these 2 days. Everything was calm, as though nothing at all had happened. Moreover, Ren Xiaosu also kept his promise to not ask any questions in class for 3 days. This made Hu Shuo feel like there really was an air of festivity. As for what this air of festivity was, it was probably being comfortable in both mind and body, the feeling of not having to work. During dinner, Hu Shuo reminded Ren Xiaosu, "When you say you won't ask questions for 3 days, that doesn't mean you can save 3 days worth of questions to ask me on the 4th day. Don't try any tricks, understand? It won't work." Ren Xiaosu was taken aback. He had not expected Hu Shuo to anticipate this and shut down his plan. Experience really did come with age. At this moment, Chen Wudi, who was eating next to them, asked, "I have a question I'd like your help with." Hu Shuo looked to Chen Wudi and said kindly, "You're different from Ren Xiaosu, so ask away." Chen Wudi nodded and said, "The height and diameter of a cone, SC, are equal, and the radius of SC in a cylinder, OM." Chen Wudi then looked at Ren Xiaosu and said, "Master, I don't remember the rest of the question." Ren Xiaosu patiently reminded him, and the radius of SC in a cylinder, OM, are also equivalent, as are their volumes. What is the ratio of the curved surface area of SC and OM? Hu Shuo looked up into the starry sky and said with a sigh, "You're just great." Ren Xiaosu suddenly said, "If you don't want to answer this question, then fine, I can ask a different question." When Hu Shuo saw Ren Xiaosu being so serious, he turned around and looked at him. "Let me hear what you have to ask first." "Who exactly are you?" Ren Xiaosu asked. Hu Shuo was a little taken aback. He suddenly realized this question was much simpler to answer than the other questions Ren Xiaosu had. Besides, he had not shied away from anything either. It wasn't like he couldn't say it. "I, Hu Shuo, served as director of the Li Consortium's 1st Army Group's Office of Special Investigations. My rank is Lieutenant General, and I'm the interim overseer of Stronghold 108, Hu Shuo answered. Ever since the incident at Stronghold 109, the Li Consortium quickly took over control of all the strongholds under them. The original stronghold overseers outside the organization had only remained in power because of an agreement between the corporations. At that time, the organizations had only just started out and were not as powerful as now. They tried all sorts of ways to infiltrate into the strongholds and slowly grew their own armies. It wasn't until several decades later that the consortium slowly became the true controllers of the various strongholds. But even after that happened, no one was willing to break the status quo. Now that the Li Consortium had taken over all their various strongholds, they became the official owners of 11 strongholds. Moreover, the banks in these 11 strongholds started completely rejecting the currencies of the other organizations. All of a sudden, the other organizations' currencies depreciated within these 11 strongholds. Ren Xiaosu suddenly felt like he understood why Hu Shuo had maintained his neutrality all this while. Could it be that, as the current overseer of Stronghold 108, Hu Shuo was thinking of using other forces to weaken the Li Consortium's grip on power and achieve the goal of true authority for himself? However, Hu Shuo looked at him and said with a smile, "I can guess what you're thinking. But the truth is that what you're looking at is just the surface. Perhaps you'll come to understand it one day. I'm looking forward to seeing your face when that happens." Su Xianchu's power was no secret, after all. Besides, back when Luolan was at Stronghold 109, he even enlisted Lu Yuan's help specifically to capture Su Xianchu. As such, when Captain Zhou, Lin Qi and the rest of the platoon returned to Stronghold 108 and debriefed, the head of the Li Consortium's army immediately realized that all of what had happened in the mountains must have been caused by Su Xianchu. As for why the wolf pack had moved from their original location, it was obvious that they must have sensed danger and shifted elsewhere in advance. Furthermore, they could have been originally targeting the outpost Li Qingzhang was commanding, but it just so happened that the nano-soldiers inadvertently protected the outpost from disaster. Thinking of it that way, everything started to make sense. However, some officers in command of the Li Consortium's fighting forces realized from Captain Zhou's written statement that Su Xianchu seemed to be gathering their Li Consortium's nanomachines. The higher UPS of the organization were very clear about one thing. If anyone wanted to use the nanomachines, an encrypted pairing process would have to be carried out internally by the organization first. So why would Su Xianchu, a supernatural being, want to get his hands on the nanomachines? At this time, the powerful think tank of the organization began to analyze the situation. According to the existing intelligence they had, the Qing Consortium had issued arrest warrants for the trio of Su Xianchu, Yang Xiaojun, and Luo Xinyu. Yang Xiaojun was confirmed as belonging to the Yang Consortium and the saboteurs. She was from the bloodline of the Yang Consortium, while her status was that of a saboteurs member. The issue surrounding her status was slightly more complicated. Since Su Xianchu was wanted at the same time as Yang Xiaojun and Luo Xinyu, there was a high chance that Su Xianchu was also affiliated with the Yang Consortium or the saboteurs. However, all of the identified members of the saboteurs so far were females. As such, Su Xianchu was tentatively identified as a field agent of the Yang Consortium. This information was very important as the Li Consortium had intel that proved their neurotech had fallen into the hands of the Yang Consortium after Stronghold 109 was brought down. That meant the Yang Consortium was also conducting full-scale tests and coordination on the usage of nanomachines on their end. Now that Su Xianchu had suddenly appeared in the vicinity of the Li Consortium's controlled area and was stealing their nanomachines, what did that entail? It meant the Yang Consortium might start a war against their Li Consortium. In the vast room of the command center, dozens of the Li Consortium's officers were standing by and listening. When this conclusion came to light, everyone looked somber. Seated at the round table was a middle-aged general. We intended to strike first, but who could have guessed the Yang Consortium had even more urgency? Gentlemen, you represent the glory of the Li Consortium, so go back to your respective posts and prepare yourselves. Someone asked, what do we do about Su Xianchu and the wolf pack? Su Xianchu probably ran far away from here after the previous attack. They're only after the samples of the nanomachines, so it isn't necessary for them to hang around after getting their hands on some, another person said. The most important thing for us is still to clear out the experimentals from Stronghold 109. Only by doing so can we stabilize the region behind us. Where's the combat brigade that was recently deployed there? Asked a white-haired general of the Li Consortium. They just arrived at the newly established forward operating base yesterday. But they haven't checked in with us yet today, a staff officer said. Get in touch with them, the general calmly ordered. That staff officer immediately went out. But 10 minutes later, he suddenly came running back and pushing open the door of the command center. We've lost contact with the entire 4th Combat Brigade. We haven't been able to contact them since they left the FOB. It fell silent in the command center. How could 4,500 people just disappear like that? Ren Xiaosu, far away at the outpost, did not know anything of what had happened. Meanwhile, Su Xianchu, further away at Stronghold 178, was even more unaware of the developments. There was an air of joy at the outpost currently. As the Lunar New Year approached, the former refugees who did not even know when their next meal would come were suddenly treated with an abundance of meat every day. This was probably the best Lunar New Year every one of them had had. After Lin Qi and the officers left, Ren Xiaosu thought a large force would come up the mountains to lay siege on the wolf pack again. But in the end, there were no signs of them at all. However, there was a small group that headed into the mountains to try to recover the lost nanomachines. But just as the Li Consortium had expected, they discovered that the nanomachines were most likely already taken away by Su Xianchu. The only other people who came up to the mountains were Hu Shuo's men. These people had not come here to report about work to him but to deliver some red paper, ink brushes, and ink. When everyone first talked about putting up couplet decorations for the new year, Hu Shuo had refused to write any, saying he had never written couplets before. But surely they had to put up some couplets, right? There wouldn't be any New Year festivities if there were no couplet decorations. In the past, people would always put up couplets to celebrate the Lunar New Year. In the entire town, there were probably only 1 or 2 people who knew how to do calligraphy, or rather, only 1 or 2 people could get their hands on an ink brush. Whenever the Lunar New Year rolled around, almost everyone in town would buy their own red paper and approach these calligraphers to help them write a couplet. It wasn't expensive to do so, and payment would probably amount to only enough to buy 1 meal. In this season, no one cared about such a small amount of money no matter how poor they were. Here in the outpost, Hu Shuo was the only one who looked like a cultured person. If they didn't get Hu Shuo to write the couplets, who else could they ask? In the end, Hu Shuo could not refuse their constant requests. Thus, he ordered his men to send over some items that were used for writing couplets. Hu Shuo set down a table in front of the outpost and put a pre-cut piece of red paper on it. Everyone in the outpost surrounded the table to watch. For the refugees, an ink brush felt really distant to them. Next to Hu Shuo, someone said with a laugh, "Sir, you won't charge us to write this couplet, right?" Hu Shuo shot him a glance. "There's no need to pay. Your writing must look really nice," someone flattered. Hu Shuo's image on most days was a sagacious demeanor, and he looked like someone who excelled in the four arts. Hu Shuo did not respond. He deliberated in front of the table for a very long time before writing, "To get rich, build roads first." To Ren Xiaosu silently looked at the ugly cursive words on the paper and lamented, "Never judge a book by its cover. These words you wrote and the image you portray don't match at all." Hu Shuo was unhappy to hear that. "I already said that I didn't want to write, but you all still made me do it. I'm already not charging for this. What more do you want?" Ren Xiaosu said in seriousness, "If you wrote this and wanted to put it up in my previous town, you'd have to pay others to do so." Hu Shuo stared at him. "All you know is how to criticize. Would it kill you to not speak?" However, Ren Xiaosu was very puzzled. "You're pretty learned and can teach rather well in math, physics, and chemistry. At the least, you're much better than that Mr. Zhang in my previous town. But who would write something like 'to get rich, build roads first' for a couplet? What's more, your handwriting looks a little crooked." Hu Shuo felt wronged and speechless. His image had gone down the drain. One zither, wiki, go, calligraphy, and painting to a Chinese proverb. This is a fair way of representing China's 30 years of economic development. Invest in infrastructure by building roads and railroads to power GDP growth. A basic wooden house had already been built. To keep the inside of the house warm, everyone skinned the wild animals the wolves had sent over and washed them clean. They then lined the outside wall of the house with the skins after drying them so the wind wouldn't get in. After the house was completed, the duo of Ren Xiaosu and Li Qingzhang wanted to drive back to town. They were going there to bring Wang Fugui, Yan Liuyuan, Zhang Wu, and the rest over to the outpost. But Hu Shuo stopped them this time. "It's no longer the same outside of town. If you two go back there to bring your friends back, something could go wrong. Wait another 2 days before going." Ren Xiaosu was startled. Did something bad happen? "The Li Consortium lost an entire combat brigade," Hu Shuo replied. This time, everyone else at the outpost was startled. There should be several thousand people in a combat brigade, right? How could they be lost just like that? Hu Shuo was amused. But they really were lost just like that. Therefore, full martial law has been enforced outside of Stronghold 108, and even trenches have been dug too. If you two go back at this time, you might not be able to get out of the town even if you got in an Eve. Ren Xiaosu frowned. "Then what can we do?" "Wait a day." Hu Shuo laughed. "I'll handle things for you." When Ren Xiaosu heard that, he did not say anything else. He was curious to see how Hu Shuo would resolve this matter. As it got closer to the new year during these 2 days, Hu Shuo started speaking less. Everyone would often see Hu Shuo sitting on the cliff next to the outpost all day without doing anything other than looking out into the distance. Ren Xiaosu walked up to Hu Shuo and asked, "Are you thinking of your family?" Hu Shuo ignored him, but Ren Xiaosu asked again, "Other than that grandson of yours, don't you have any other family?" Hu Shuo gave him a look. "No, why? I've seen you in a strange mood of melancholy these past few days." Ren Xiaosu said in worry, "If you don't mind, we can become blood brothers. Since I have another younger brother, we can recreate something along the lines of the Oath of the Peach Garden. Get lost." Hu Shuo snapped at him. Are you trying to take advantage of me? My grandson is older than you. Ren Xiaosu said rather sadly, it's almost the new year, but he isn't reuniting with you. He has something more important to handle, Hu Shuo said. All of a sudden, Ren Xiaosu felt that Hu Shuo could be planning something big. That grandson he was talking about was probably a key figure in this entire plan. Wait, is your grandson a Li? Hu Shuo looked at him with a half-smile. Lots of people share the surname Li. Which one are you talking about? Ren Xiaosu froze. He should have thought of this long ago. If that grandson was the person he was guessing it to be, much of Hu Shuo's behavior would be explainable. The next morning, an off-road vehicle drove up to the outpost. Ren Xiaosu guessed it was probably here to look for Hu Shuo. But when two officers got out of the vehicle, they were holding two additional sets of military uniforms in their hands. Hu Shuo, who was sitting in the front yard, pointed them to Ren Xiaosu and Li Qingzheng and said, "Give them to the two of them." Ren Xiaosu asked, "What is it?" "If you wish to go through town, you'll have to don this uniform," Hu Shuo said. "But this is the Li Consortium's military uniform," Ren Xiaosu said in shock. "Won't they require IDs when passing through town? If we get caught, won't we get into big trouble?" However, those two officers said, "We've prepared for that as well." They then handed Ren Xiaosu a blue booklet. Ren Xiaosu opened it up immediately and saw an officer's ID of the Li Consortium. There was a serial number, a stamp, and even Ren Xiaosu's photo in it. He did not even know when his picture had been taken without his knowledge. Hu Shuo laughed and said, "The negatives have already been destroyed, so don't worry, the serial number is real, the rank of captain is also real, all of it is real. You're now my subordinates, so whoever checks on you won't be able to find any trouble with you at all. But I doubt that anyone would dare to stop our staff for checks anyway. After all, normal soldiers are all pretty afraid of the Office of Special Investigations." Ren Xiaosu fell silent. This old man's influence within the Li Consortium seemed huge. Reaching the status of regular Li Consortium soldier was such a sought-after dream by many people. But in this person's hands, it was nothing more than a small gift he could present to anyone he wanted. Besides, this man probably had some other motives by granting him this status, right? Why would a sly old fox like Hu Shuo do so much for him? If he had to go through all this trouble to make him a Li Consortium officer, he might as well just send some of his own people to bring Xiaoyu and the others over. Curious, Ren Xiaosu asked, "Aren't you afraid that I'll use this position to do other stuff?" Hu Shuo was amused. "You? What could you possibly do?" After lunch that day, Ren Xiaosu and Li Qingzheng drove back to town in their Li Consortium military uniforms. Li Qingzheng looked very excited. "So I've become a regular officer of the Li Consortium just like that? I can get into the stronghold now. Are you that desperate to get into the stronghold?" Ren Xiaosu asked curiously. Li Qingzheng laughed and said without any hesitation, "Who doesn't? I heard you don't even need to close the doors at night in the stronghold. There aren't even any burglars around." "Then I'm afraid that I'll have to disappoint you," Ren Xiaosu said while looking out of the window. "I don't find it that great in the stronghold. In fact, I think it's much nicer living in town." Li Qingzheng responded, "I don't believe you. You must be lying. In any case, the fortune teller told me I would get into the stronghold when I met my benefactor, and I'll only believe that." Ren Xiaosu just smiled but did not say anything. If you chose to believe in fortune-telling, you might as well depend on yourself. When they reached the town's checkpoint, the two of them produced their IDs. When the sentry guard saw the words Military, Office of Special Investigations, he looked astounded, and he hurriedly let Ren Xiaosu and Li Qingzheng through. Meanwhile, Wang Fugui and the others had already packed their belongings and were waiting for Ren Xiaosu to arrive. When Ren Xiaosu said he was going to take them to the outpost to spend the new year, no one doubted if Ren Xiaosu could do it. Now that Ren Xiaosu had really come to pick them up, they were all carrying big and small bags like they were going on an outing. It was in complete contrast with the tense atmosphere in town. When the woman from the grocery store next door saw Ren Xiaosu dressed in a military uniform, she froze. Since when did he become a soldier of the Li Consortium? Wasn't he still just a private army soldier the last time? At that time, she treated Ren Xiaosu with derision due to his status as a private army soldier. As a matter of fact, her lover was a true blue soldier of the Li Consortium. She knew how difficult it was to enter into regular service as a soldier of the Li Consortium's army. During this time, her business at the grocery store had plunged due to Wang Fugui's grocery store opening next to hers. In the past, people would beg her to sell things to them. But now, Wang Fugui would kindly do business with anyone, so of course everyone was more willing to buy from his shop instead. So she became angrier and angrier by the day, seeing how busy it had become over at Wang Fugui's shop. While Ren Xiaosu, Yan Liuyuan and the others were packing their things, this woman secretly ran towards the military base stationed just outside of town. A fictional event, Liu Bei, Guan Yu and Zhang Fei took an oath of fraternity in a ceremony in the Peach Garden, believed to be in present-day Zhouzhou, Hebei, in the novel Romance of the Three Kingdoms, and became blood brothers. Ren Xiaosu glanced at the woman's receding figure. He thought for a moment before saying, "It's all right, there's nothing to be afraid of." While they were packing, Wang Fugui cheerfully brought over the store's ledger to Ren Xiaosu and said, "Our grocery store's income has been really steady. The town's residents from near and far are all coming to our place to make their purchases. Here, Xiaosu, please check the transactions." Ren Xiaosu laughed and shot old Wang a glance. "Hey now, it's the new year. Why are we checking the accounts? I have nothing to worry about with you taking care of things here. Get in the truck already. I'll take all y'all to the outpost to have a look-see and then take y'all back on the 8th day of the new year." Although the outpost was a nice place, it was still a location with defensive duties. There shouldn't be any inspections during the new year, but if anyone discovered they had brought over their family members when the festivities finished up, it could get pretty troublesome. Besides, Wang Fugui and the others were also living good in town now. The impish Yan Liuyuan had even become a friend of the women and used those relationships to find out a lot of information. Yan Liuyuan whispered from next to him, "Bro, why has the Li Consortium also issued an arrest warrant for Su Xianchu? Was it you again?" "Ahem." Ren Xiaosu looked at Yan Liuyuan. "Don't tell anyone." Yan Liuyuan nodded cleverly. "Don't worry, my lips are sealed." Right at this moment, the woman from the grocery store next door led a group of soldiers in a hurry back to the store. Even from far away, she was already pointing at Ren Xiaosu and shouting, "It's those two." When they came to town last month, that older guy was still wearing the uniform of the private army. But this time around, he's dressed in the military uniform of the Li Consortium. What's more, he's even a captain. Most people would not recognize what ranks the soldiers were from their shoulder marks. But anyone who ran a grocery store at the entrance of the stronghold would definitely be observant of people, so how could she not know about such things? That group of soldiers surrounded Ren Xiaosu and company. A lieutenant walked forward and faced Ren Xiaosu. "Which division are you two from? Produce your military IDs." Ren Xiaosu and Li Qingzheng exchanged a glance. When Ren Xiaosu reached for his military ID, the sound of guns being cocked rang out and more than a dozen black barrels were suddenly pointed at them. The woman from the grocery store smiled joyfully. If there were any problems with this young man's military ID, Wang Fugui's shop would surely not be able to continue operating, right? Ren Xiaosu smiled as he produced his military ID from his pocket and handed it to these soldiers before him. He said calmly, "Not too many people dare conduct a spot check on those of us in the Office of Special Investigations these days." Li Qingzheng gasped at this. He realized Ren Xiaosu was not panicking one bit. Moreover, he even learned to speak in the same condescending tone Hu Shuo used when he spoke. It was way too similar. When the officer facing Ren Xiaosu heard the words Office of Special Investigations, he frowned. He opened up the military ID book and was indeed greeted by Ren Xiaosu's photo, the stamp, the serial number, as well as the striking words that said Military, Office of Special Investigations. If these were normal times, he would definitely be panicking by now. If anyone were hauled to the Office of Special Investigations, they would never be seen again. But after considering everything, there were far too many suspicious aspects to Ren Xiaosu and Li Qingzheng. Regulars had a different bearing and posture while standing after they went through training. The sloppy way Li Qingzheng was wearing his uniform made it seem like they were imposters. The officer said coldly, "We need to verify it first before we can confirm whether you're really from the Office of Special Investigations." He then ordered his subordinate to take out a palm-sized device. That soldier inputted Ren Xiaosu's military identification number into it, and a picture of Ren Xiaosu was displayed. The officer gasped, spun around, and gave that grocery store woman a slap that sent her flying to the ground. Following this, he turned around and bowed to Ren Xiaosu, "My apologies, sir." Ren Xiaosu took back his military ID and examined him. "I now suspect that you're a double agent who's trying to persecute our Li Consortium's officers. Is that watch on your wrist a comms device you use with other spies?" In response, the officer immediately removed his watch and handed it to Ren Xiaosu. "Sir, please take this back for investigation. Consider it a little souvenir from me." Ren Xiaosu's gaze swept over the others. "Are there any suspicious items on the rest of you? I suspect you might be smugglers." This time, one of the soldiers said hesitantly, "Sir, I don't think the Office of Special Investigations covers smuggling, right?" Ren Xiaosu fell silent for a moment. "We're going to start investigating that now." When Li Qingzheng witnessed this from nearby, he remembered how he was the one who was recently receiving bribes. But from the looks of it, Ren Xiaosu was even better at it. This group of soldiers had approached them so aggressively at the beginning, but they were now standing in a row with their heads down. All of the money in their pockets had been confiscated by Ren Xiaosu for evidence. "All right," Ren Xiaosu waved them off. "You may go back now. I suddenly think that you do not look suspicious anymore." Truly, this position Hu Shuo arranged for them was really useful. The woman who had been smacked to the ground was still a little dizzy. After coming back around, the officer slapped her again. "Bring this insolent woman back with us." The group of soldiers carried the woman away. When Ren Xiaosu saw them leaving, he said with a sigh, "How nice of them to bring us so many souvenirs. They're such honest people." With that, he handed the watches to Wang Fugui. Wang Fugui had given away his own watch to Li Qingzheng in order to waive the manual labor obligations of the girls. Li Qingzheng hesitated for a long time before saying, "I already sold off the watches you guys gave me. Why don't I pay y'all back?" Ren Xiaosu laughed and said, "Then wouldn't you have helped us for nothing? Just keep it for yourself. We're not that petty." "Oh, all right," Li Qingzheng said happily. However, why did something feel wrong? Why did it suddenly feel like Ren Xiaosu was the platoon commander instead of him? On the way back to the outpost, Yan Liuyuan laid down in the back of the truck and said excitedly, "Bro, is it any fun at your outpost?" "It's pretty fun," Ren Xiaosu said with a smile. "What do y'all do every day?" "We get to attend classes and eat meat daily. Occasionally, we'll take a stroll into the mountains where we can pick wild vegetables and mushrooms or catch some rabbits." Ren Xiaosu said, "There are a lot of rabbits in the mountains. When we get there, I'll teach you how to build snares to catch some." All of a sudden, Ren Xiaosu thought of something. Even though Yan Liuyuan was also a supernatural being, he did not have any skills to defend himself with. He thought that maybe he should also gather some nanomachines for Yan Liuyuan to use. When they got back to the outpost, Ren Xiaosu saw Hu Shuo cradling a satellite phone and explaining into it, "Our Office of Special Investigations does not investigate smuggling." Yes, that's right, we really do not investigate that. It must be a misunderstanding. We don't intend to seize authority from the audit department. All other reasons aside, it was totally worth the effort to grant Ren Xiaosu the status of officer of the Li Consortium if he could send him away from the outpost for the rest of the day. As expected, Ren Xiaosu was busy almost all day. The return journey to town alone already took 6 hours and could even go up to 8 hours if there were any delays. This was as good as being given a day off. But he couldn't have expected that someone would bring a satellite phone to him by the afternoon, saying that there was a call from the head of the audit department who was stamping with fury. At first, Hu Shuo did not understand the issue. But after he took the call, he realized Ren Xiaosu had involved himself with investigating smuggling in town. Within a system, there was a clear division of duty. If you encroached on other people's authority, that wouldn't be acceptable at all. Hu Shuo was shocked to hear that. Didn't you go back to town to fetch your family? So why did you get yourself involved in investigating smuggling? When he hung up, he looked at Ren Xiaosu. Did you investigate smuggling? Ren Xiaosu laughed and said, I was just helping your department expand into new areas. Aren't I great? Hu Shuo said bitterly, when did I ask you to help us expand our area of activity? Why didn't you take on the duties of the Public Order Division as well then? Ren Xiaosu was not happy to hear that. You didn't say that I couldn't do that. Before I departed, what did I ask you? You even asked me what I could possibly be capable of doing when I asked if you were afraid that I would abuse the position. Hu Shuo's eyes looked like he was about to fly into a rage. But at this moment, Yan Liuyuan came over and smartly said, Hello, Grandpa Hu Shuo, nice to meet you. When Hu Shuo saw a clean-cut Yan Liuyuan speaking to him, he held back his anger and said with a smile, Hello, nice to meet you. Yan Liuyuan said, I've heard about you from my brother. He said that you're a really great man who is so learned that you can tackle any questions that they pose to you during classes. When I grow up, I want to be as educated as you. Ha 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 ha, is that so? Hu Shuo's anger immediately dissipated. Did that kid really say that? Yeah, Yan Liuyuan said, so please don't be angry anymore. He didn't do it on purpose anyway. Forget it then, I won't be angry. Hu Shuo said with a cheerful smile, hurry up and bring your belongings into the house. We're going to start preparing meals for everyone. Oh, there are so many young ladies here as well. Then let me thank you first, Grandpa Hu Shuo, Yan Liuyuan said as he turned around and gave Ren Xiaosu a wink. The argument was resolved just like that. Ren Xiaosu did not even know whether to laugh or cry at this. That Yan Liuyuan was able to become a friend of the women in town was really a testament to his talent. Then Hu Shuo looked at Ren Xiaosu and said, your younger brother is much smarter than you. Go and clean up the house. I don't want to see you right now. Meanwhile, Chen Wudi took Xiaoyu and the others around on a tour of the outpost. It wasn't a big place, and after Xiaoyu had seen all of their houses, she said with a frown, why is it so dirty in the houses? Don't you big boys know to clean the place on most days? Yan Liuyuan whispered, big sister Xiaoyu has been particularly fussy about cleanliness recently. All of us at home are quite afraid of her and we would never think to start eating without washing our hands first. Even Uncle Fugui feels the same. Come on, girls, get your hands on some cleaning tools. We'll get these houses cleaned up first. Xiaoyu coordinated the female students like a steward would. The female students were also particularly obedient to her. This outpost was occupied by a group of men. Half of them were even former refugees who had not gone through any military training and had no concept of how to keep their quarters clean. But half an hour later, the entire place looked like new again. Even Li Qingzheng and his men could not believe this was where they used to live. Xiaoyu and the female students had even cleaned the glass windows, which led to the inside of the houses becoming brighter. Everything was in perfect order. Ren Xiaosu sighed. Xiaoyu was becoming more and more like a housewife. When Li Qingzheng and his men saw this group of women walking in and out of their houses to clean them up, they couldn't take their eyes off them. Meanwhile, the female students kept showing sweet smiles whenever they saw Ren Xiaosu and Yan Liuyuan. As the group of men sat around the campfire to barbecue the meat, Li Qingzheng lamented, "Brother Xiaosu is really too capable." Their eyes were brimming with tears of envy. At this time, Xiaoyu stood in a doorway and exhaled. "We're finally done cleaning." She looked at the campfire. "How can y'all only eat barbecue? Let me cook some veggies for y'all." Wang Fugui said to Ren Xiaosu with a smile, "Our entire family is tied together by Xiaoyu now. Without her, it would be such a mess." "Xiaosu, it looks like the Li Consortium is preparing for war. Will it affect us badly?" Ren Xiaosu said, "Have you found out where Stronghold 88 is yet?" "Not yet." Wang Fugui shook his head and said, "But why don't you ask that elderly man? It seems to me that he should know a lot." Ren Xiaosu looked at Hu Shuo. He used to be worried that Hu Shuo would believe him to be an enemy if he asked that question. After all, he thought that since Hu Shuo was a high-ranking officer of the Li Consortium, he would definitely take their side. But since Ren Xiaosu had obtained more information that he could judge him with, he thought he could safely ask Hu Shuo the question. Ren Xiaosu beckoned everyone else to the campfire. Then he sat down beside Hu Shuo and asked, "Do you know where Stronghold 88 is?" "The Yang Consortium's Stronghold 88. Hu Shuo gave Ren Xiaosu a look. "Why are you asking? I'll get straight to the point. We were actually heading to Stronghold 88 at first, but we got conscripted and ended up here instead," Ren Xiaosu explained. "My advice to you is not to think so much for now." Hu Shuo said, "Stronghold 88 is northeast of Stronghold 108. The Li Consortium has already stationed a large force in that direction, the Yang Consortium as well. 3 other strongholds lie between Stronghold 88 and Stronghold 108. If you're thinking of going there alone, you might be able to do so. But what about those with you? How are they going to make it there? This is something you can rely on with your status as a member of the Office of Special Investigations. Is there really going to be a war?" Ren Xiaosu wondered. "Not only that, even the Qing Consortium has deployed their troops to the borders of the 3 corporations." Hu Shuo looked at Ren Xiaosu and said, "The Li Consortium is trying to handle the experimentals at Stronghold 109, but we're already on the brink of a massive war. If you want to cross the battlefields and get to Stronghold 88 at this time, you had better be prepared for the death of your companions. Stray shells and bullets on the battlefield have no eyes. They couldn't care less about who you are." Ren Xiaosu frowned. "Then will we be safe at the outpost? We can hide out here until it's over." Hu Shuo sighed and said, "The Li Consortium does not have enough military strength yet and could deploy the private troops at the outposts to the front line as cannon fodder." Based on Hu Shuo's explanation, the Li Consortium intended to clear the experimentals from Stronghold 109 before they began the war. They had even sent a combat brigade over to carry out that mission. However, time would not wait for the Li Consortium, and neither would the Yang Consortium and the Qing Consortium wait for them. Not only were the experimentals at Stronghold 109 a threat to the Li Consortium, but they were similarly close to the Qing Consortium's Stronghold 111. Therefore, since war was about to break out, the 2 consortiums might as well make a bet on which way the experimentals might go. And now, the most dangerous thing that could happen was that Ren Xiaosu and company might also get sent to the battlefield. As they had too many things that hadn't been taken care of yet, they couldn't just drop everything and leave for good. Even if they hid deep in the mountains, it would be equally dangerous, because the forested hills were a path the experimentals would definitely take if they were coming here. Why else would the Li Consortium waste all that manpower by sending troops to these outposts? What if the experimentals come and attack the Li Consortium's stronghold? Ren Xiaosu asked. Hu Shuo looked at Ren Xiaosu and said, actually, there isn't much danger around Stronghold 108. You can even consider sending your family into Stronghold 108 first. If there are defenses in place, the experimentals won't be able to force their way into the stronghold. What happened at Stronghold 109 was due to a lapse in its defense. Although Stronghold 109 was destroyed, the experimentals would still find it hard to get close to Stronghold 108 if the Li Consortium installed heavy weapons atop the stronghold walls. After all, the experimentals were still flesh and blood. Their muscles might be able to block normal bullets, but they wouldn't stand up to artillery fire. Even the metal storm mountain obliterator that Qing Zhen brought was enough to make them retreat. It was just as Qing Zhen had said. Only a child would be afraid of these experimentals. Qing Zhen understood full well how terrifying humanity's firearms and explosives were. So the only worry everyone had was if the experimentals ambushed them in these wastelands during a battle. But there wasn't much to worry about if it were just a stronghold defense. Ren Xiaosu asked Hu Shuo, can you help me send them into the stronghold? I'd like for them to live there temporarily. Hu Shuo laughed. That's something you can also do now. A captain of the Office of Special Investigations has great authority. All of a sudden, Hu Shuo added, make sure you don't abuse your authority, though. Don't worry. I won't be investigating smuggling anymore. Ren Xiaosu was surprised to find out that the Office of Special Investigations could actually send people into the stronghold. That really was a lot of authority. However, it seemed like this old man was not on the Li Consortium's side on this matter. He wondered how the higher UPS of the Li Consortium would feel if they knew the truth. Curious, Ren Xiaosu asked, aren't you afraid that I'll snitch? Hu Shuo gave a half-smile and said, aren't you afraid I'll tell the Li Consortium that you're hunting down their nano-soldiers? The two of them fell silent. Ren Xiaosu knew Hu Shuo was a sly old fox and that his odd behavior must have been noticed by him. However, he had not expected Hu Shuo to lay it all bare so abruptly. But since they both knew each other's secret, no one could snitch on the other. In Ren Xiaosu's opinion, Hu Shuo was more trying to establish a friendship or alliance with him. The foundation of this trust would be based upon their knowledge of each other's secret, as well as the fact that the other party's grandson was Li Shenton. Hu Shuo had always been a high-ranking officer in the Office of Special Investigations all these years. In order not to implicate his family back then, he had kept the fact that he had a daughter a secret. Furthermore, he did not even concern himself with her. However, the Li Consortium forced his daughter to her death many years later. The Li Consortium was too powerful. It was so powerful he could do nothing about it even though he was a supernatural being, as well as a high-ranking officer within the Office of Special Investigations. After all, his subordinates were all loyal to the Li Consortium, not him. But this situation completely reversed after Li Shenton became a demon whisperer. The young man who had escaped from the psychiatric hospital had an incredibly destructive power. The female students started singing by the campfire while the group of roughnecks did not even dare to make a sound as if afraid of ending the girls' dulcet singing. Xiao was wearing an apron and stir-frying some vegetables in the kitchen. When they made the trip here, they had brought along quite a bit of supplies for the new year. Old Wang had even managed to get a hold of a box of fish and shrimp from someone in the stronghold. Suddenly, Li Qingzheng emotionally said, "This is probably the most proper Lunar New Year I've celebrated in the 29 years of my life." Ren Xiaosu gave him a look and laughed. "To be honest, we also spent our Lunar New Years very miserably in the past." "That's not true." Yan Liuyuan giggled and said, "We were clearly very happy. We used to run off to a hill somewhere far away where we would view the fireworks set off from the stronghold. The fireworks were beautiful to watch. But at this moment, an off-road vehicle drove up to the outpost. An officer came over to Hu Shuo and whispered something to him for a while. Hu Shuo's expression grew even more solemn than before. Ren Xiaosu looked at Hu Shuo and asked, "What is it?" Hu Shuo looked at Ren Xiaosu and replied, "Get ready to send your family back to the stronghold after the new year has passed. War has broken out." Ren Xiaosu was surprised to hear that. It was just another hour until the Lunar New Year. Who would have thought a war would erupt on New Year's Eve? Hu Shuo said, "The Li Consortium's commander has already given the order to start the assault. The frontline troops have already started advancing towards the area controlled by the Yang Consortium. In another few hours, it will be blanketed by the flames of war. Aren't you going to eat before you leave?" Ren Xiaosu asked calmly. Hu Shuo laughed. "I'd thought we could celebrate the new year, but we didn't even get to eat the reunion dinner. What a pity, the thing I was most afraid of still arrived. In this world, things never turned out the way people wanted them to." At this moment, Xiaohu came out of the kitchen with several boxed meals in her hands. "Uncle Hu Shuo, I've filled these up with dinner. Eat them while y'all are on the road." Hu Shuo was taken aback. He broke out into a smile and said, "Thank you." Suddenly, Hu Shuo looked at Ren Xiaosu and asked, "Ren Xiaosu, have you ever heard of Murphy's Law? Anything that can go wrong, no matter how unlikely, will go wrong. To put it simply, that just means that whatever we're afraid of will somehow happen." Ren Xiaosu froze for a moment. "Why are you talking about this? Do you think we're in a dream right now or living in reality?" Hu Shuo laughed and said, "We're definitely in reality. If you don't believe me, I can pinch you," Ren Xiaosu said. "But isn't reality based on probability? It's only in dreams that things you're most afraid of will somehow come true, isn't that so?" After that, Hu Shuo laughed and turned around to leave. "I'd rather this be a dream." Ren Xiaosu could sense a hint of sorrow within this old man. The sound of the bell that symbolized peace in the new year resonated across the stronghold. Soon after, firecrackers, of which many of the rich could afford, started popping in front of their houses. The children had also come out onto the streets and were excitedly taking in the sights. They were all wearing their new clothes and even holding little firecracker tubes that they picked off from the main bunch. Qing Zhen was standing out in the yard of his villa. His hair had grown much longer since he wasn't even able to get a barber to come over after being put under house arrest here with Luo Lan. Suddenly, a crow flew over in the dark of the night. It soared between the sound of the firecrackers going off and did not seem one bit affected by it. Qing Zhen raised his hand, and the crow shrewdly landed on his arm. Qing Zhen picked up a tiny piece of bread and said with a laugh, "I hope you won't mind this. We don't have much food around here either. Luo Lan has almost been starved thin as well." The crow lowered its head and pecked the bread into its mouth. Qing Zhen helped it ruffle its feathers straight with a smile. The black crow was always an ominous symbol in the eyes of many people, because it loved flying to wherever there were dead people. But Qing Zhen did not shy away from the crow at all. Rather, he seemed to love it. His gaze shifted to the crow's legs where a tiny bamboo tube was attached. Qing Zhen detached it and removed a slip of paper from it. The more he read it, the bigger his smile grew. "All right, I got the letter. You may return to your owner and have him feed you something nice. It's the new year, but he didn't let you get any rest," Qing Zhen said as he threw his forearm up and released the large crow that spread its wings and flew into the night sky. When Qing Zhen walked back into the villa, Luo Lan was lying down on the sofa and saying, "Don't you agree that those old fogies of the Qing Consortium are too much? It's the new year, but they won't even give us a full meal to eat, let us get a haircut, and our water and electricity keep getting cut off as well. We're accomplished servants of the Qing Consortium. How can they do this to us?" Qing Zhen smiled and said, "You can have my share of the bread. I guess we can only blame it on ourselves for losing the strongholds we were put in charge of. Was that our fault?" Luo Lan said unhappily, "Who could have predicted that there would be an earthquake? Besides, it's the new year now. Surely they can't make us go hungry during the new year, right? Don't worry. Qing Zhen smiled and said, these days will be over soon. At this moment, the doorbell rang. Luolan stood up from the sofa, his fat rolls bouncing. Could they be sending us food? That uncle of yours isn't that kind. He did everything in his power to ride on the coattails of the Qing consortium, so why would he risk all of that to help us? Qing Zhen said calmly, this is an especially good time to draw the line against us. The infighting of the consortiums had always been downright dirty and nasty. The Qing consortium had not only imprisoned Qing Zhen and Luolan in this isolated villa, it even sent Luolan's uncle to watch over them. Perhaps it was because the directors of the board suspected that Qing Zhen and Luolan had betrayed the clan, so they decided to let the two of them have a taste of being betrayed by their own family as well. Luolan and Qing Zhen shared the same father but different mothers. This uncle of Luolan's had obtained some status within the consortium with Luolan's aid in the past. And now he had been sent to watch over Luolan. However, this uncle was not one for old time's sake. Instead, he was even harsher when it came to watching over the two. He even tried to express his stance and drew a line between Qing Zhen and Luolan by persecuting them. Cutting their food rations, cutting off their water and electricity, refusing Qing Zhen and Luolan's demands, all of that was done by Luolan's uncle. Sometimes, people found it hard to imagine what a person would do to play up to those in power. Luolan went to open the door while mumbling, my relationship with him isn't good either, so don't keep ridiculing me with those words of yours. The same goes for that uncle of yours. He opened the door and saw a middle-aged man standing at the entrance. He was holding a plate in his hand and smiling as he looked at Luolan. Behind this middle-aged man were 2 rows of soldiers. Ever since Qing Zhen slipped away the last time, the consortium had deployed even more troops in the vicinity surrounding the villa. Even on New Year's Eve, they did not let their guard down. Luolan looked at the middle-aged man at the door and said, is something the matter? The middle-aged man smiled and said, aren't you gonna greet your uncle? Luolan said disdainfully, are you fit to be my uncle? But the middle-aged man was not bothered. He smiled and said, it's New Year's Eve. I came to see you too and also brought along some food. What food? Luolan asked. The middle-aged man smiled and said, I had some leftovers from my dinner at home, and I knew that you two would definitely be hungry, so I quickly sent it over for you. Luolan laughed. Am I, Luolan, someone who would eat leftovers? The middle-aged man threw the plate in his hand onto the floor. Since you don't want to eat it, I won't force you. Luolan's face turned dark. He kept staring at the middle-aged man who was a blood relative. Qing Zhen suddenly said to the middle-aged man, hey, go outside and wait for a while. The middle-aged man was startled. But it was Qing Zhen who had spoken. Whatever influence this silent tiger of the Qing consortium had left was still enough to strike some fear in him. The middle-aged man stayed silent for a long while before finally stepping out of the villa in the end. As he stood outside and watched the fireworks bursting above the stronghold's sky, he was overjoyed. But at this moment, the 2 rows of soldiers raised their guns when the villa's front door opened and took aim at it. They watched Qing Zhen lead Luolan out of the villa and stand still. Qing Zhen said to everyone with a smile, because of us too, we've made it so that everyone can't go home to spend time with your families on New Year's Day. As such, we would like to extend our condolences to you. Luolan said, that's right, we just want to extend our condolences. Qing Zhen smiled and said, let me introduce myself. I'm Qing Zhen, and standing next to me is Teacher Luo. Right, that's who I am. Qing Zhen looked at Luolan and said, since we're expressing our condolences, we definitely have to put on a performance for everyone. What are we going to perform then? Qing Zhen looked at the middle-aged man and said, let's perform a haircut on the first day of the new year where the uncle dies. All right. The middle-aged man was so angry that he laughed. Are you two still kids? What kind of dumbass games are you still playing? SHH, Qing Zhen put his index finger over his lips. Then he raised his right hand that was holding a pair of scissors and snipped off a bit of Luolan's hair. The middle-aged man sneered. "Arrest them and lock them up." Qing Zhen looked at him and said with a smile, "Happy New Year." A bright firework suddenly shot up into the sky above the stronghold. That shining, bright light illuminated Qing Zhen's smile as a sniper's bullet fired out of a gun several hundred meters away. In an instant, a bloody mist burst from the middle-aged man's chest in front of Qing Zhen. His body was even sent flying back by the inertia of the bullet. Qing Zhen's gaze turned from the fireworks back to those 2 rows of soldiers. He smiled and said, "Did you all enjoy this performance?" Everyone was frightened. They had thought Qing Zhen was only trying to provoke them. But they never expected him to really do as he said he would. A soldier trembled as he said, "Mr. Qing Zhen, aren't you afraid the board will mete out punishment on you?" Qing Zhen stood still and said with a sunny disposition, "They won't. After all, they need me now." Right at this moment, a car whizzed down from the end of the street, with the white ginkgo leaf symbol becoming visible under the glow of the fireworks. The car came to a stop outside the villa, and Secretary Zhou from the board jumped out. When he saw Qing Zhen, he said coldly, "The board has ordered that Qing Zhen and Luolan immediately head for the front lines to serve as military advisors." After saying that, he noticed the bloodstains in front of the villa's door. He looked at the soldiers and asked, "What happened here?" The soldiers said, "They killed the commander." Secretary Zhou looked at the broken corpse on the ground and said in contempt, "Dumbass." The Qing Consortium, the Li Consortium, and the Yang Consortium were situated in the southwest of the territory. Due to their geography, these 3 organizations were always the most intricately linked in the southwest. As for the territories of the other organizations, they had always found it difficult to expand southwest due to the region being inaccessible to them. Of the southwestern region, the Li Consortium was farthest south. Reportedly, if you headed south from there, you would reach a rainforest you would very likely get lost in. In it were countless venomous insects, and legend had it that no one had ever managed to trek through this forest to get even further south. But due to the effects of tectonics, the weather in the region of these 3 organizations was becoming much colder. In recent years, the rainforest's ecology had also changed dramatically. The Li Consortium had even once planned to draw this rainforest into its own territorial lines and build a new stronghold within it. The Qing Consortium was northeast of the Li Consortium on terrain that was easy to defend but difficult to attack. Stronghold 111 was even hailed as a mountain city due to it being built next to a mountain, and it acted as an extremely important land and water hub in the southwestern region. The Yang Consortium was inside a huge basin with Longnan's One Zone Consortium and Stronghold 178 to its north. But in recent years, the Zone Consortium had been constantly plotting to usurp the northwestern territory that was controlled by Stronghold 178, although they didn't have much of a conflict with the Yang Consortium. This geography meant the southwestern region was a tripartite division where a power struggle was ongoing. The 3 organizations did not share their resources, and whatever the Li Consortium had, the Yang Consortium didn't. Whatever the Yang Consortium had, the Qing Consortium didn't. There would always be a reason for war, and resources tended to be the true motivation. But there used to be people who said they had visited the Central Plains to the east before and described it as a very prosperous place. There were even large human settlements that existed outside of strongholds too. But in the post-cataclysm world, the world they knew was no longer around. As New Year's Eve passed, Hu Shuo probably arrived back inside Stronghold 108. The 3 war machines of the consortiums had already deployed their forces to hold their borders, where they waited within dozens of kilometers of each other for the real war to break out. Yan Liuyuan and the others were very excited at first. But as it got later, they couldn't endure any more and fell asleep. Ren Xiaosu was sitting by the campfire alone as he thought about their future plans. He was thinking of what he could do to ensure that everyone would survive the ravages of war this time. According to Hu Shuo, he could send Yan Liuyuan and the others to live in Stronghold 108. Even if the experimentals attacked, they wouldn't be able to break through the tight defenses of a stronghold. Besides, the effects of the war between the three consortiums wouldn't affect the stronghold so quickly either. Fighting a war was like playing a game. Nobody smart enough would go all in at the very beginning. It started snowing. One of the house's doors suddenly opened, and Yan Liuyuan came walking out wearing a coat. He sat down beside Ren Xiaosu. "Bro, are you worried about the war?" "MHM," Ren Xiaosu acknowledged. "Why don't we leave this place?" Yan Liuyuan whispered, "Even if we have to head deep into the forested mountains, we could live very well there." Ren Xiaosu gave him a look and said, "And not have any more contact with the outside world ever again." "Bro, I know that you want to go to Stronghold 88 to look for Big Sister Xiaojin. But why didn't she come and look for you instead?" Yan Liuyuan said, "Actually, I've already found out where Stronghold 88 is, but I don't want to tell you. That's because I don't think it will be any different for us there. She's an important figure of the Yang Consortium and we're just refugees." Ren Xiaosu looked at Yan Liuyuan. They often had disagreements in the past as well. For instance, when Yan Liuyuan did not want to attend school and learn how to hunt instead. Ren Xiaosu used to reject his requests, and it led to them quarreling. But this time, Ren Xiaosu realized Yan Liuyuan was really resistant to the word stronghold from the bottom of his heart. This made him hate those who lived in the strongholds as well. Yan Liuyuan said, "Bro, the stronghold doesn't welcome people like us." Ren Xiaosu sighed and said, "It looks like you were lying to me when you said that you were getting along with your classmates quite well back at Stronghold 109. MHM Yan Liuyuan nodded and said, "No one wanted to talk to me and Wang Dalong. In fact, they even avoided us like the plague. Their parents were always nagging them as though they were afraid their children would make friends with us. When the teacher asked a question in class and I couldn't answer it because I'd never learned it before, the teacher would say that it was only normal that we refugees did not how to study and that we were stupid. Once, a classmate of mine lost something, and everyone immediately suspected me and Wang Dalong of stealing." Ren Xiaosu was silent. That was the stereotype the people in the strongholds had of refugees. It was a mindset that had built up within them over several decades. Yan Liuyuan continued, "They searched both our desks and found nothing in the end. But at that time, Big Sister Xiaohu often gave me pocket money for school, and it was a lot too, much more than what the other students would get. When the teacher saw the money, I was accused of stealing it, because they felt that a refugee couldn't possibly have so much money. I tried to explain it to them, but it was of no use." Wang Dalong was so scared that he cried. "But, bro, don't worry, I didn't cry. You've mentioned before that this world doesn't trust tears." Yan Liuyuan said, "Bro, I don't like it in the stronghold, nor do I like those who live inside of it. Maybe Big Sister Yang Xiaojin is different, but what about her family and friends?" Ren Xiaosu sighed and said, "I don't know." "So, bro," Yan Liuyuan suddenly sounded resolute, "wait for her to come and look for you instead. If she doesn't come, then it's meaningless for you to travel all the way north to Stronghold 88. You once told me not to let the sorrows of our era become my sorrow as well, but this era's sorrows have already become a cancer that's ingrained within the Stronghold's residents. You should have let me explain it to the teacher on your behalf," Ren Xiaosu said. "How would you have dealt with it?" Yan Liuyuan looked at Ren Xiaosu. "I'd kill whoever dared to wrong you." Ren Xiaosu said with a laugh, "We can't go the north now anyway, so I'll send y'all back to Stronghold 108 early tomorrow morning. You don't have to attend school anymore. Just get Ms. Zhang to teach you. She might be a Chinese teacher, but she's had formal training in education. That should be more than enough to teach y'all math, physics, and chemistry." Yan Liuyuan's eyes lit up at the words. "I like Ms. Zhang Wu. I think she's quite suitable for you. You little rascal." Ren Xiaosu shot him a look. Then Yan Liuyuan suddenly looked up at the hill. Ren Xiaosu followed his gaze and looked as well. He discovered the Wolf King standing there alone and looking straight back at Yan Liuyuan. Ren Xiaosu was very certain the Wolf King was not looking at him but Yan Liuyuan. This was an event that had happened before when they were fleeing the previous time. However, Ren Xiaosu had some doubts in this moment. The Wolf King should have already led the wolf pack deep into the mountains. But on this night when Yan Liuyuan came to the outpost, it actually risked its own safety and came out just to have a look at Yan Liuyuan. Ren Xiaosu asked, "Have you ever crossed paths with the Wolf King?" No. Yan Liuyuan shook his head. One Longnan prefecture in South Gansu, bordering Shaanxi and Sichuan. Ren Xiaosu thought for a moment before saying, "Sure, but you have to stay behind me." Although he had been working with the wolves for a long time, Ren Xiaosu was still a little worried. What if the Wolf King suddenly went crazy and decided it wanted to hurt Yan Liuyuan? With that, the both of them decided to head into the mountains. But all of a sudden, Ren Xiaosu saw the headlights of a vehicle speeding up the mountain. He frowned and said, "Go back into the house first. Wake Li Qingzheng and get him out here." "Okay." Yan Liuyuan went to wake Li Qingzheng up. Shortly, Li Qingzheng walked out of the house wearing a military overcoat. "Xiaosu, you called for me. Someone's heading up the mountain. It should be the Li Consortium's people." Ren Xiaosu said. "It's the new year now. Who has the time to head up here into the mountains?" Li Qingzheng was surprised to hear that. The two of them stood at the entrance of the outpost and waited. An off-road vehicle came to a stop at the outpost entrance. Then a soldier got out and tossed a manila envelope to them. "We're massing the private troops. This is the paperwork stating that you all must gather by 0700. Anyone who turns up with less than a full platoon will be investigated and held liable as deserters." The punishment for deserters was extremely harsh within the Li Consortium's military. Not only would the person be arrested and charged with a crime, but their families would also get implicated as well and lose their eligibility to receive their portion of potable water as refugees of the town. In this era, not having a source of potable water meant certain death. Some people might be able to find water in the wilderness, but there were still risks attached to that. The soldier who came to send the documents got ready to get back into the vehicle to leave. But Li Qingzheng calculated that since it was already 2 a.m., that meant they had 5 hours to gather and report to the outside of the stronghold. Otherwise, they would be treated as deserters. He looked at that soldier and said, "We're guarding the outpost here. What will happen to it if we leave? Can't you make an exception for us?" The soldier sneered as he got back into the vehicle. "It's useless telling me that. If you don't wish to assemble, you can choose not to." Ren Xiaosu looked at Li Qingzheng. "Do you have any family in town? If you don't, you can choose to run away." Li Qingzheng said bitterly, "How can I? I might not have any family left, but more than a dozen people in our platoon still have family members living in town. If a single person runs away from our platoon, the entire platoon will be subjected to the same punishment." This was the Li Consortium's cruel way of meting out punishment. It was done this way to make comrades watch over each other so that they wouldn't run away. As long as a single person ran away, the entire platoon would be done for. Ren Xiaosu looked at Li Qingzheng in surprise. Even though he knew they were going to end up as cannon fodder, he still chose not to run away for other people's sakes. Hu Shuo had already said before the reunion dinner that they all might end up becoming cannon fodder in the war. Everyone also had their own verdict regarding this. What other reason could there be for sending private troops to the front line? Could they tackle the tough situations? No, they would only be fit enough to serve as cannon fodder. But this Li Qingzheng was also quite a strange one. Before getting to know him, he would look to take as much advantage of someone as possible. But once they became friends, he became someone who was extremely loyal and dependable. The regular officer status Hu Shuo had gotten for them was basically a permanent role. If Li Qingzheng made use of this status to run away, it wouldn't take any effort at all. In fact, Ren Xiaosu had initially planned on bringing Yan Liuyuan and the others into the stronghold with him. After all, it would be incredibly easy to get that done with his status as an officer of the Office of Special Investigations. But from the looks of it, the platoon would be done for if he brought his family into the stronghold and hid with them. Ren Xiaosu thought for a moment before sighing, then let's wake everyone up. We have to set off now, but let me send my family back to town first. After that, we'll go and assemble. Deal, Li Qingzheng said. At this moment, Ren Xiaosu suddenly thought of something. Can you teach me how to drive? If they were to leave the Li Consortium's territory in the future, whether it be for Stronghold 88 or Stronghold 178, driving there would be the most comfortable option. So Ren Xiaosu started thinking about learning how to drive. Besides, after the troops assembled this time, they would definitely have to head north. If it were only Li Qingzheng who could drive, he would definitely be worn out driving all the way there. Ren Xiaosu thought that since he couldn't master the bicycle, why not just jump straight to learning how to drive a car? It wouldn't be worth wasting a skill duplication scroll to learn a life skill like that. Moreover, he did not have any skill duplication scrolls right now either. Even if he had one, he would definitely be better off using it on someone like Hu Shuo. Li Qingzheng was taken aback. Sure, I'll teach you along the way. We still have enough time. Driving isn't difficult at all, although you shouldn't drive on the mountain paths. Once we descend down the mountain and get onto the straight roads, you'll pick it up very quickly. That was exactly how it was. For driving, if you didn't need to follow the traffic rules like within the stronghold, you could quickly understand it if you just drove around for a bit. The people at the outpost all looked bleary-eyed when they got awoken. Li Qingzheng shouted at the top of his voice, "Stop fucking sleeping! Hurry up and pack all of the supplies we have at the outpost into your personal field packs. Don't load them up onto the truck. If they discover we're carrying all that cured meat during an inspection, we'll bear consequences." Someone asked, "Lord of Wolves, what are we packing up for?" Li Qingzheng swept his eyes over them and said, "To get ready to join the war." Everyone was stunned. Now? Aren't we going to wait until the Spring Festival is over? As if a war would wait for you to celebrate the New Year first. Li Qingzheng sighed and said, "Go and pack your stuff. We'll gather out here again in 15 minutes. The outpost's troops' faces fell. Everyone had been getting on with each other like family recently and talking about living at the outpost from now on. But all of a sudden, they were about to be sent to the battlefield as cannon fodder. "Can we not go?" someone asked. "It's much better here at the outpost." When they first got here, everyone felt working at the outpost was a really tough job. But as time passed, they discovered it wasn't difficult living here at all. In fact, it was even more comfortable than living in town. Li Qingzheng turned strict at this moment and said, "If we don't assemble, some of our comrades' families in town will not survive. Moreover, the Li Consortium will definitely arrest us, so we won't be able to run away." Ren Xiaosu was observing this group of people from off to the side. There were only a total of 11 automatic rifles in the entire outpost and not even a single grenade, much less improvised mortars, anti-personnel mines, etc. They also did not have the most basic radio set for communication purposes. If they actually fought in the war, they wouldn't even be able to call for support in the large battlefield that could span 2 mountain ranges. At that time, their enemies on the battlefield would learn these private troops were the weakest point where they could easily breach the defense. Of course, if the enemies thought the platoon that Ren Xiaosu was in would be the same as the other private troops, Ren Xiaosu alone would be enough to teach them all a lesson. Ren Xiaosu wondered if the wolf pack would follow as well. He turned around to look at the top of the hill and saw that the Wolf King was no longer there. At this moment, Chen Wudi came over to Ren Xiaosu and said, "Master, are we also going to join the war?" Let's observe the situation before deciding whether to take part in the war or not. Ren Xiaosu said, "Go and help everyone carry their belongings. I'll go and get ready as well." "Sure." Chen Wudi replied. The principle behind how these weapons worked was probably by using a program to set the nanomachines to create an incision effect through high-frequency particle cutting action. Even though this concept sounded difficult to grasp, it was actually similar in logic with water jet cutting. Most high-frequency particle cutters tend to be heavy machineries. Due to the blade not having plasticity, these cutters couldn't be molded into swords. But the nanomachines allowed the Li Consortium to overcome this problem, and they were able to create even sharper melee weapons for close quarters combat. This weapon was definitely not better than the black saber for Ren Xiaosu. But if the students could be equipped with the nano armor in the future, it might prove useful for them. But Ren Xiaosu couldn't afford to think that much about the future right now. He wasn't retrieving these nanomachines for his own use. They were going to be for Yan Liuyuan. After resetting the nanomachines, Ren Xiaosu called Yan Liuyuan into the house. Yan Liuyuan asked curiously after closing the door behind him, "Bro, what's the matter?" "Put your hand out," Ren Xiaosu said. Yan Liuyuan stuck his hand out and watched as Ren Xiaosu grabbed his arm tightly. Following that, a silvery stream permeated out of Ren Xiaosu's skin and spread over to Yan Liuyuan. "These are the Li Consortium's nanomachines. Since you're slightly smaller in build, this amount of nanomachines might already be enough to form a thin layer of armor around you. It can also help to increase your musculoskeletal strength when it resides in your body. I'm giving it to you so that you may use it to keep yourself alive. Don't ever reveal them to anyone under normal circumstances." Ren Xiaosu said, "If the situation becomes dangerous, you can use it to kill your opponents." Yan Liuyuan looked at Ren Xiaosu in a daze. "Bro, what are you going to do if you give all of your nanomachines away to me?" He wanted to retract his hand to stop the nanomachines from transferring over to him. However, he couldn't pull his hand away as he was much weaker than Ren Xiaosu. Ren Xiaosu held Yan Liuyuan's hand tightly, gripping him so hard his arm ached. He enunciated each and every one of his words to Yan Liuyuan. "When it becomes necessary, you can use these nanomachines to protect everyone." There wasn't any sentimental talk as Ren Xiaosu only spoke about the most practical of matters at this moment. Just like Yan Liuyuan was willing to sacrifice his life to make a wish for Ren Xiaosu, Ren Xiaosu was also willing to give away all of his hard-earned nanomachines to Yan Liuyuan in one fell swoop. It was also precisely because of this that they made it through hard times in the past. Ren Xiaosu did not have a habit of depending on these nanomachines, anyway, since he was already strong enough by himself. Besides, Ren Xiaosu believed there would be plenty more nanomachines waiting for him on the battlefield ahead. After all, the Li Consortium was pretty generous in that sense. He might even assemble enough nanomachines for the 8 students after he got to the front lines. Ren Xiaosu said in his mind, "Palace, pair the nanomachines again." The palace replied, "A fee of 20,000 yuan will be charged." Ren Xiaosu was stunned. Didn't he have exactly 20,000 yuan on him right now? Why was the palace even charging a processing fee to newly pair the nanomachines? But Ren Xiaosu could only eat the loss at this time. "Hurry up and pair. You can collect the money whenever." After he finished speaking with his mind palace, the 20,000 yuan in his storage space disappeared. Meanwhile, the nanomachines that were originally connected to his neurons started disconnecting from him. Ren Xiaosu looked at Yan Liuyuan and said, "Allow the nanomachines to pair with you, then try to see if you can control them." When the nanomachines fully integrated into Yan Liuyuan's body, the veins and arteries in his body turned silver. Yan Liuyuan said with some uncertainty, "They're really easy to control and seem very obedient to my commands. It feels the same as controlling my fingers." Ren Xiaosu let out a sigh of relief. He was most worried that Yan Liuyuan's synchronization rate would be too low and that he would be unable to put the nanomachines to good use. But from the looks of it now, Yan Liuyuan's synchronization rate seemed really high. Don't use them in normal circumstances. Ren Xiaosu said, if you use them recklessly, it will definitely attract the attention of the Li Consortium. All right. Yan Liuyuan nodded in agreement. All of a sudden, a cry came from outside. Where's Lu Zhaozhang? Ren Xiaosu pushed the door open and went out. What's the matter? Li Qingzheng looked at Ren Xiaosu with a terrified expression and said with great difficulty, Lu Zhaozhang took some salt and cured meat and disappeared. He even took a rifle and half of the ammo we had. He disappeared. Ren Xiaosu was taken aback. This outpost was on top of the mountain, and there was only one path leading to the bottom. If Lu Zhaozhang had disappeared, then it could only mean that he had gone into the mountains. Lu Zhaozhang was formerly a refugee who had escaped to Stronghold 109 with Ren Xiaosu and the others. As he had no relatives here, he started getting thoughts of running away when he realized he would be going into battle as cannon fodder. Not only did Lu Zhaozhang run away, he even took some supplies with him for his own survival. Li Qingzheng turned ashen. How could he run away? What will happen to the rest of us now that he's fled? Li Qingzheng had only stayed behind because he regarded the soldiers at the outpost as his brothers. But he ended up getting betrayed by one of them. Chen Wudi looked at Ren Xiaosu. Master, why are there such people in the world? Ren Xiaosu said calmly, they're the darkness that's trying to devour the light that you are. What should we do now? Li Qingzheng mumbled, with one less person, all of us are going to get punished. Someone suddenly said, why don't we flee as well? We'll die on the battlefield anyway. But someone else started pleading with everyone else. My wife and daughter are still in town. Please, we mustn't flee. Who knows, we might escape being punished with only one soldier missing. Another man also begged, please, everyone, we can't run away. If you run away, what are those of us with families here going to do? Li Qingzheng looked at Ren Xiaosu, and everyone else's gaze followed his. In reality, everyone understood that the decision-maker in the platoon was Ren Xiaosu, not Li Qingzheng. Ren Xiaosu met their eyes and considered it for a couple seconds before saying, let's go and assemble. I have a plan. Really? Someone asked, Platoon Commander, you aren't joking, right? Li Qingzheng felt reassured by Ren Xiaosu. When has our platoon commander Xiaosu ever not been serious? It won't go wrong as long as we listen to him. Finally, Ren Xiaosu became the real leader in everyone's hearts. 1. Plasticity, the quality of being easily shaped or molded. See also https://n.wikipedia.org/wiki/ultrasonic_machining. Until the triangle's edges were milled round. Ren Xiaosu did not try to enlighten Chen Wudi anymore. He had to experience for himself his inner demons and think it through before he would be able to step out of his predicament. The military transport truck did not head straight for town after it arrived at the bottom of the mountain. The journey to town would only take 3 hours, or even 2.5 hours if they drove a little faster. They still had about 2 hours or so now to burn. Ren Xiaosu took them by another route, to which Li Qingzheng wondered, what are we doing? Ren Xiaosu gave him a look. You'll know when we get there. On the side of the road, Ren Xiaosu had Li Qingzheng set up an ambush. He also requested that Li Qingzheng change into his Li Consortium military uniform and have his Office of Special Investigations identification with him. At this moment, a military transport truck drove over from afar. Ren Xiaosu calmly walked to the middle of the road and blocked the path of the vehicle. When the people in it saw Ren Xiaosu in his Li Consortium military uniform, they came to a stop. This truck was filled with the full platoon of another outpost. Their platoon commander jumped out and said with a fawning smile, Sir, what is the matter? Ren Xiaosu flashed his ID and said, The Office of Special Investigations is conducting an investigation. I suspect that there's a spy in the truck. Get everyone out. The platoon commander was startled. He hurriedly claimed innocence and cried out, "Sir, could there be a misunderstanding? We're only soldiers of the private army. Don't fucking bullshit me." Ren Xiaosu said with a cold expression, "Don't tell me you're the spy." The platoon commander immediately shut his mouth and beckoned for the other soldiers to get out of the truck. "Hurry up and get out. Cooperate with this officer's investigation." After the group of soldiers stepped out of the vehicle, Ren Xiaosu asked, "Who still has family back in town?" A man raised his hand weakly. "Sir, my family is still in town." Ren Xiaosu said to that platoon commander, "It's him, come with me." Li Qingzheng led a group of soldiers over and tied that man up before taking him back to their own truck. Li Qingzheng was startled when he realized that Ren Xiaosu's so-called plan was to actually kidnap someone into their group. Actually, the Li Consortium was only worried that there would be deserters. As long as they showed up with a full-strength platoon of 30 soldiers, they would definitely not say anything about it. However, Li Qingzheng never expected that Ren Xiaosu would come up with something like that. How ruthless! But better you than me. As if Li Qingzheng and the others cared about the life and death of another platoon. In these times, it was already great to survive. It didn't matter how they did it. When the platoon commander saw the uniforms of the soldiers beside Li Qingzheng, he felt that something was wrong. Why were some of them dressed in casual wear and others dressed in the uniform of the private army? The platoon commander asked suspiciously, "Sir, are your men in the private army?" Ren Xiaosu hesitated for a moment. "That's right, I've been hiding with the private troops for a very long time to find the spy." The platoon commander did not dare say anything. After all, the Office of Special Investigations had a reputation. Without any blood relations to the Li Consortium, no one would dare to offend the Office of Special Investigations. Ren Xiaosu cast him a glance before saying to Li Qingzheng, "Set off." After he said that, their military transport truck turned around in the direction of town and drove off. Ren Xiaosu was looking at that man who had been tied up. He said to Chen Wudi, "Untie him." The man nearly cried from fear. "Sir, I'm really not a spy." Ren Xiaosu nodded. "Starting from today, you're now a part of this platoon." That man was stunned. "But, sir, I'm not from your platoon." All the private soldiers next to him pointed their guns at him. Ren Xiaosu said, "You are now." It was also at this moment that the dazed platoon commander behind them managed to react. "Fuck, they were here to steal our people. What fucking Office of Special Investigations? How despicable!" The soldiers beside him were panicking a little. "Platoon commander, what do we do now?" That platoon commander clenched his teeth. "I doubt we'll be able to chase after them. Besides, I also can't be sure whether his Office of Special Investigations' identity is real or not. Let's go and steal someone from the other platoons." There were several dozen outposts around the area, which meant there were several dozen platoons as well. Ren Xiaosu was still unaware of what he had sparked. All of these platoons were about to tussle trying to steal soldiers from each other to fill up their rosters. Some of the platoons were at full strength and did not consider the possibility of something like this happening. But there were a lot more platoons that had a person missing, just like Ren Xiaosu's platoon. All of them were still wondering what they should do, but with Ren Xiaosu doing what he just did, it was as though a new world had opened up for them. After the platoons from the outposts got out of the mountains and headed for town, there were only 2 or 3 major roads that they could take. As such, this scenario would probably be best described with the saying, "The brave win when rivals cross paths." As Ren Xiaosu's group sped towards town, the sun was rising. Then they were surprised to see several military transport trucks of the Li Consortium driving in the direction they had come from. When those vehicles saw Ren Xiaosu's group, they stopped. One of the drivers in the Li Consortium group rolled down his window and shouted, "Are you all the private troops that came from the outposts?" Li Qingzheng was taken aback. "That's right. Did you see any groups fighting on your way here?" the driver asked. No, we set off very early, Li Qingzheng said calmly. The driver cursed as he rolled the window back up. Fuck, I heard a riot broke out over there. It's so troublesome to have to go out there to look at what's happening. Ren Xiaosu and Li Qingzheng sat in the front of the truck without saying a word. However, they could guess what had happened. Li Qingzheng asked softly, "It should be fine, right?" Ren Xiaosu also felt a little guilty. "I guess it won't really be much of a problem." Ren Xiaosu sent Yan Liuyuan and the others back to town and instructed them to be cautious of the circumstances before heading to the assembly point to report in. In the morning, Hu Shuo had just finished a short meeting at the Office of Special Investigations when he received a satellite call from a deputy of his. "Lieutenant General, the commanding officer of the private army forces is looking for you." Hu Shuo was taken aback for a moment. "Why is he looking for me?" Hu Shuo then answered the phone. "This is Hu Shuo speaking." As a result, he was met with a barrage of complaints on the other end of the call. Although the private troops were made up of refugees, their commanding officer was still a family member of the Li Consortium. The person on the other end of the line was complaining so much that it made Hu Shuo unhappy. "Why the fuck would I want to meddle in the affairs of your private troops? Even if you gave those lousy troops of yours to me for free, I wouldn't take them in. Stop trying to accuse me of something." And with that, Hu Shuo hung up. However, he immediately got a headache over this matter. He was quite certain Ren Xiaosu caused trouble for him again. Lu Taiyu looked at Li Qingzheng. "Did anything happen on your way here?" Li Qingzheng stood to attention and answered, "Sir, there were no incidents along the way. Our 8th platoon of the Iron 2nd Battalion has assembled on time. Awaiting your instructions, sir." All right, that's enough." Lu Taiyu waved his hand in frustration and dismissed him. "Do you think it's not chaotic enough? Just stand right here and be quiet." With that, Lu Taiyu left. No one knew where he went. Someone in the platoon whispered, "Did everyone else that was behind us get into a spat?" "Seems so. They're probably stealing from each other's platoons," Li Qingzheng said in embarrassment. Ren Xiaosu was amused. "That could turn out to be a good thing. As y'all should know, they can't enforce the law on us if everyone is a criminal. If a fight breaks out between all of the outposts, there won't be a need for any punishment. Actually, the soldiers from other outposts only dared to do so because they also understood this fact. Since the Li Consortium needed people to fight the war now, surely they wouldn't waste their efforts to hold them all accountable, right?" At this moment, someone looked at Ren Xiaosu and said, "Platoon commander, could you have expected this too? So you only wanted to create chaos that would lead to a situation where the law would not apply to all those in the wrong." Ren Xiaosu cleared his throat. "Not bad, right? Everything is well within my control." But at this moment, Chen Wudi said, "My master is not that smart." Ren Xiaosu looked at Chen Wudi speechlessly. Actually, the management of the private troops had always been a mess. It became even more chaotic now that the private troops had recently expanded. Ren Xiaosu and his group had never been to other outposts before. If they had, they would know that many of the outposts did not have the required full strength. The platoon commanders of the platoons would even deliberately lie about the number of soldiers under them as they wanted to freeload off of the consortium's supplies. But in the end, they were all caught off guard when they were suddenly requested to assemble for war. If the higher UPS knew they were freeloading off them, they wouldn't be let off with just a simple punishment. Perhaps some people would even get executed as a warning to the others. So some people deliberately continued stirring up the pot even further amid the chaos. While Lu Taiyu personally went to bring the rest of the private troops back, the other strongholds' private troops set out. Only Stronghold 108's platoons remained behind. They were supposed to assemble and report at 7 a.m., but it was almost evening now. During this period, no one bothered with Ren Xiaosu and his group. Their entire platoon was allowed to roam freely like grazing sheep. Ren Xiaosu even had time to take everyone to town where he bought an egg-stuffed flatbread for each of them. This was a treat from Li Qingzheng. In the evening, Lu Taiyu returned with a large number of troops. These private soldiers all had bruised and swollen faces. But the most shocking thing was that several of the established platoons had completely disappeared. Many of them had their clothes torn, and some even lost their shoes. Only Ren Xiaosu's platoon was still looking somewhat dignified. Ren Xiaosu's group was the 8th platoon of the Iron Second. There should have been 7 platoons ahead of them. However, the 6th platoon ceased to exist, with all of their soldiers stolen away by the other platoons. Even the platoon commander himself had been taken away. At this time, Lu Taiyu no longer talked about meting out punishment. On normal days, he would also do all he could to embezzle everyone's provisions and never really cared about his military responsibilities. This time, he was getting a taste of his own medicine. Ren Xiaosu did a rough count. Currently, there were still 33 full-strength platoons of the private army remaining. In effect, the number of soldiers here was around 1,000 or so. Lu Taiyu stood before everyone and said, "You've all been taken care of by the organization during peacetime. As the saying goes, armies are trained for a 1,000 days only to be used for a single battle. Now is the time for you to serve the organization. We'll advance to the front lines at Mt Tantu, Mt Fenji, and Mt Shuanglong, where we'll construct bases on the high ground to prevent an invasion by the Qing Consortium's troops." Ren Xiaosu was stunned for a moment. Getting the private troops to construct bases on the high ground? They really intended to send them to their deaths. Although there were still huge advantages in selecting the right terrain to fight on, artillery shells that could impact with extremely high accuracy over a very long range were a problem. Even if they managed to occupy the high ground, their enemies could simply bombard the entire area with artillery shells if they had enough funding. In a time like this, anyone guarding the high ground would surely die. Generally, such situations required the construction of extremely strong defensive fortifications that would help play a strategic role on the high ground. But was there time for Ren Xiaosu and the others to build any defensive fortifications? Everyone in the private troops burst into an uproar since no one was willing to give up their lives for nothing. But even as they protested, no one dared to run away. Lu Taiyu was surrounded by a reinforced company made up of his trusted troops. There were 180 of them in total, and their weapons and equipment were much better than those that Ren Xiaosu and the others carried. But these troops were not used to fighting in battle. On one hand, they were responsible for the security of Lu Taiyu. On the other hand, they were to supervise the platoons of the private troops and ensure that they carried out their orders properly. Lu Taiyu said with a smile, "However, there's a big reward for taking on a responsibility as great as this. Those who perform well at the end of the war can gain direct entry into the Li Consortium's troops. Not only that, but you'll also be handsomely rewarded as well. At the very least, you'll be ensured the status of legal resident and get to live in the stronghold." Some of the soldiers became excited and eager on the spot. "We can get into the stronghold and be recognized as legal residents." "Are you serious?" Lu Taiyu smiled and said, "As the commander of the Iron Second, would I make such jokes with you? The higher UPS of the organization have already issued an official notice. You can rest assured." A lot of people were moved by the thought of that, as most refugees were not knowledgeable. Historically, this group of people were always cheated by others. Now that they were in a group together, it was even easier to fool them all. But Ren Xiaosu knew exactly why Lu Taiyu dared to make such a grand promise. It was because he thought that none of these close to 1,000 private soldiers would make it back alive. Many others among the troops were well aware of this too, but they did not dare speak out. They could only leave their comrades to discuss it excitedly. Suddenly, Lu Taiyu clapped his hands and signaled for everyone to be quiet. "Get into the trucks. It's time to set out." Lu Taiu's off-road vehicle and the reinforced company's military transport trucks did not drive at the front but stayed in a supervisory role at the back of the convoy. They were watching to see if anyone would try to escape midway. Ren Xiaosu was watching this through the rear-view mirror of the truck and said to Li Qingzheng, that Lu Taiu is a coward. When the time comes, he'll definitely be too scared to get onto the battlefield personally. Since that's the case, we'll have more leeway to do what we want. Li Qingzheng was taken aback. What are you playing at? Xiaosu, don't be rash. Someone leaned forward and asked through the gap between the driver's cabin and truck bed, Platoon Commander, Platoon Sergeant, what if we really end up as cannon fodder on the battlefield? Yet, Lu Zhaozhong took half of all our ammo with him. When we defend the strategic high ground, we'll definitely run out of ammo in no time. Surely we aren't gonna have to resort to biting the enemy with our teeth, right? Even now, everyone was still resenting Lu Zhaozhong. They could understand why he chose to be a deserter since all of them had thoughts of running away as well. But by taking away so much cured meat and ammunition when he left, that was as good as condemning everyone else to their deaths. The current situation for their platoon was almost no different from having to fight barehanded. Ren Xiaosu looked at Li Qingzheng and asked, if you knew that someone would run away, would you still have stayed behind? Yes, there are still others in the platoon who have families to protect, after all, Li Qingzheng said. What upset Li Qingzheng the most was that he had treated everyone like brothers, yet one of them ran away with his weapon and provisions without even saying a word of goodbye. Fortunately for them, there were enough provisions left for the rest, and they would not have to go hungry as a result. Li Qingzheng sighed. If someone offers y'all a 1 million yuan, would any of you sell me out? Don't think too much. Ren Xiaosu comforted him, you aren't worth that much. We won't accept the money if it goes against our conscience. Li Qingzheng was speechless. The soldiers at the back of the truck started laughing at this. However, someone still said worriedly, jokes aside, what if we really end up becoming cannon fodder? Ren Xiaosu thought for a moment and said, don't worry, I'll come up with something when we get there. Everyone felt relieved by Ren Xiaosu's answer. If Ren Xiaosu could come up with a plan, they would not have to end up becoming cannon fodder. When they arrived at the forward operating base in the afternoon, all vehicles passing through here were required to get refueled. Otherwise, they would not be able to continue the long-distance journey. However, this forward operating base was not required to provide meals and provisions to the private troops. Some of the private troops were starving since the beginning and thought they would surely be fed first before heading out to the battlefield. After all, superiors should not let their soldiers go hungry in the face of battle. But who could have thought the Li Consortium's combat troops wouldn't treat the private troops as human beings? However, these private soldiers of Stronghold 108 were unaware that the other private troops were still entitled to the usual military benefits. It was just that those benefits for them had been stopped by Lu Taiu. When it was mealtime, the soldiers in Ren Xiaosu's group hid in the military transport truck and secretly ate their rations they had brought from the outpost. Although Lu Zhaozhong took away quite a lot of cured meat, Ren Xiaosu and Li Qingzheng had bought a lot of wheat flour to make into buns and flatbread. When the soldiers under Ren Xiaosu hiding in the back of the truck saw the other private soldiers enduring starvation, they suddenly felt they had followed the right leader. After refueling the truck, Ren Xiaosu suddenly said, "Platoon Sergeant, teach me how to drive." Li Qingzheng was taken aback for a moment. All right. Currently, Lu Taiu was at the FOB eating his meal. Officers like him were all served good food, and there would be people fawning upon him and showing him good hospitality upon reaching the FOB. As such, these officers didn't usually resume their journey quickly. As for addressing him as platoon sergeant, even Li Qingzheng himself did not feel anything wrong with it. Li Qingzheng was teaching Ren Xiaosu how to drive in the open area. You just need to remember to step on the clutch when you change gears when driving stick. It's not that difficult to change gears once you reach a certain speed. About an hour later, Ren Xiaosu could somewhat manage to drive on the road. As long as he did not have to shift gears, he could drive very smoothly. All of a sudden, Ren Xiaosu felt bad. He hadn't been able to learn how to ride the bicycle no matter how hard he tried. At the time, he kept blaming the palace. He thought it could be due to his ability to copy other people's skills that made him unable to learn a skill through his own means. After all, he had to make some sacrifices in order to gain something, right? Ren Xiaosu understood this very well. So it occurred to him that it was not because he was stupid that he couldn't master the bicycle, but that the palace had limited him. But right now, it seemed like, not being able to master the bicycle had totally nothing to do with the palace. It was just him. Ren Xiaosu found this difficult to accept. In the afternoon, Lu Taiyu even secretly had some wine at the fob before setting off again. Ren Xiaosu thought that if even the officer in charge of the private army was drinking during the wartime, what kind of combat effectiveness would the Li Consortium's combat troops be capable of? Upon setting off again, Ren Xiaosu insisted on driving the truck. As the saying went, strike while the iron is hot. He was determined to master this skill while he had the chance. When they got here in the morning, everyone was still laughing happily in the truck bed. But by the afternoon, no one spoke as they were all trembling in fear in the back of the truck. All of them were tightly grasping the handrails in the bed. Ren Xiaosu was driving so fast that he reached the front of the convoy in just a short while. He sat in the cab while controlling the steering wheel in high spirits. This was the first time in his life that he was driving a vehicle. It was a wonderful feeling. Li Qingzheng, who was next to him, had already turned pale. He said, "Platoon commander, the road is slippery during winter. If you drive so fast, the truck might flip over when you step on the brakes." Ren Xiaosu pondered it for a moment before saying, "Then won't it be fine as long as I don't step on the brakes?" Li Qingzheng was speechless. After Li Qingzheng took 5 minutes to calm himself down, he said in seriousness, "Platoon commander, why don't I drive instead? I'm worried that you'll exhaust yourself." Ren Xiaosu was finally persuaded to sit in the front passenger seat after the rest of his comrades on board strongly expressed their concerns. However, he was still very happy. After all, knowing how to drive in these wastelands was also considered as having a life-saving skill. Ren Xiaosu said to the palace in his mind, "What's the proficiency of my driving? It should be at advanced or intermediate level since I can drive so well, right?" The voice from the palace said, "It has been detected that the host does not possess any driving skills." Ren Xiaosu was unhappy to hear that. "Who are you bluffing here? How can I not have any driving skills when I've already driven on the road? Can you at least have some logic in your judgment? It's fine even if you just judge that I'm at a basic level." All of a sudden, Li Qingzheng said, "Platoon commander, there's a situation up ahead." Ren Xiaosu looked and saw some officers wearing the Li Consortium's military uniform standing in their way. It looked like there were quite a few of their soldiers there. "Just stay in the vehicle," Ren Xiaosu said, "let Lu Taiyu handle them since we're just normal soldiers." Lu Taiyu's off-road vehicle sped over from behind. The officer in front of Lu Taiyu maintained his high and mighty attitude as he said, "All of your trucks have been commandeered. Have all of the men in the vehicles get out." Lu Taiyu was dumbfounded. "We were ordered to quickly head to the front lines at Fend. If we hand over all of our military transport trucks to you, how are we supposed to get there? Why should I care?" The officer sneered. During their conversation, the blood vessels in his face became silvery strands. It was as though something was glowing inside his blood vessels. "All of you, get out of the trucks now." Did they intend to catch the Qing Consortium off guard? Was that why the organization had even withheld this information internally? Lu Taiyu grew cold with fear when he realized the situation was worse than he had expected. The front line at Fend where he was being deployed to would definitely end up as ground zero for this war. But how could the nano-soldiers not have their own vehicles? The nano-soldiers were always given the best equipment. They did not even need to take military transport trucks as they were all issued with off-road vehicles. Lu Taiyu asked in a whisper, "Sir, where are your vehicles?" While saying that, he took a look at the officer's shoulder patch that displayed the words Divine Arms Battalion. There was also the white logo of a nano-spider on it. This was the legendary Divine Arms Battalion of the Li Consortium. The Divine Arms officer looked at Lu Taiyu out of the corner of his eye and said, "Our vehicles are parked right up ahead. I want your soldiers to get out of the trucks and take our off-road vehicles instead. On top of that, have all your private troops take off their uniforms. We'll freeze to death if we take off our clothes in this cold weather," Lu Taiyu said anxiously. In response, the officer of the Divine Arms Battalion lunged over and punched Lu Taiyu in the abdomen. He left Lu Taiyu in such pain that he laid on the ground in the fetal position and could not even make a sound. The Divine Arms officer said calmly, "Why must you speak so much?" The truck Ren Xiaosu's platoon was in was the closest to the Divine Arms officers, so he could hear their entire conversation. When the officer said they wanted the private troops to take off their uniforms, Ren Xiaosu realized these nano-soldiers might be planning to pose as private troops on the march. The Li Consortium's nanotechnology had always been the subject of much attention. Now that it had been fully put into practical use on the battlefield, it would definitely be regarded as a great threat by the Qing Consortium and the Yang Consortium. The Li Consortium knew there were spies in their military. Therefore, the Divine Arms Battalion would have to hide their whereabouts if they wanted to spring a surprise on the Qing Consortium. As the soldiers of the Divine Arms Battalion walked over to the trucks, the lead soldier shouted to Ren Xiaosu and his platoon, "Get out here and change out of your uniforms." The person speaking froze when he realized Ren Xiaosu and his platoon were not in uniform. Ren Xiaosu was amused. Wasn't this such a coincidence? They had not even been issued with uniforms. The Divine Arms officer wondered, "Where are your uniforms?" Disgruntled, Ren Xiaosu explained, "We were never issued with uniforms. Not only that, we weren't even equipped with guns." The Divine Arms officers were stunned for a while. Since they did not have much contact with the private troops before, this problem never once crossed their minds. The officer who beat up Lu Taiyu got so angry he laughed. He looked at Lu Taiyu, who was lying on the ground, and said, "Aren't you too rampant with your embezzlement of their pay and equipment? Do you think our Li Consortium is raising you all as parasites?" He then angrily kicked Lu Taiyu's head so hard that Lu Taiyu fainted. To be honest, this commander of the Divine Arms Battalion believed his plan was well thought out. They would first pretend to be private troops and get close to the battlefield while avoiding the spies' attention. Afterwards, they would head into the mountains and flank the Qing Consortium to deal them the fatal blow. The fitness of these nano-soldiers was fantastic, and they could take routes that normal soldiers couldn't. So they could reach places the Qing Consortium wouldn't expect. This plan was also approved of by headquarters. They felt that everyone would think they would target the Yang Consortium now, so sneak attacking the Qing Consortium would catch them by surprise and lead to a victory. If any weak points appeared in the Qing Consortium, the Yang Consortium would also be very happy to seize any gains from them. Ultimately, the reason for the war between the three organizations was mainly influence. Whoever became the weakest link on the battlefield first would definitely end up facing the most violent attacks from the other sides. So even though this plan was not considered perfect, it was still a great plan. But the Divine Arms officer never expected their plan would be screwed up right off the bat. By looking at their uniforms, everyone could tell they were from the Divine Arms Battalion. Even if they drove the private troops' vehicles, they would not be able to hide that fact from the more observant people. "What do we do now then?" one of the officers of the Divine Arms Battalion asked. The commander of the Divine Arms Battalion clenched his teeth and said, "Let's put on their civilian clothes and have them wear our uniforms instead. Let them continue advancing to the front line at Mt. Fenji and have the enemy's spies in our military focus on them." Ren Xiaosu's eyes lit up. At this moment, he was considered to be holding three different identities: that of a private soldier, a member of the Office of Special Investigations, and a member of the Divine Arms Battalion all at the same time. However, Ren Xiaosu was not afraid of taking on too many identities. After all, it would be easier for him to get things done with these identities. When the Divine Arms soldiers slapped Lu Taiyu awake, one of them whispered to him, "Continue marching to the front line at Mt Fenji and get there within 10 days. If you don't get there in 10 days, you'll be brought in for a court-martial. I'll send 5 nano-soldiers with you, so don't try any tricks." The commander of the Divine Arms Battalion even placed an electronic ankle monitor on Lu Taiyu. A red light was flashing on the shackle, and it seemed like it would be used for tracking Lu Taiyu's location. But its functionality was probably not just as simple as tracking him. Why else would they rest easy that Lu Taiyu would carry out their orders accordingly? They not only had surveillance equipment on him, but also sent their nano-soldiers to follow the private troops as they headed to the front line at Mt Fenji together. This could be considered as a dual-layered security measure for the plan. The Divine Arms Battalion's decision to temporarily take over the role of the private troops was also a part of the plan. Everyone in the organization knew what the private troops' behavior was like, so most people would not generally care to plant spies within the private troops. Besides, even if they were to abruptly disrupt the battle plans of a battalion of private troops, it would have little impact on the big picture. The commander of the Divine Arms Battalion said coldly, "All of you will camp here for the day before setting off again tomorrow." However, Ren Xiaosu was very curious. This group of people in front of him were definitely not the entire strength of the Divine Arms Battalion. After all, he had not even seen Lin Chi and that Captain Zhou around. He wondered if there would be a chance to collect some more of the nanomachines. At this moment, Li Qingzheng asked, "So are we going to change into the uniform of the Divine Arms?" Ren Xiaosu nodded. "It's a good thing." Li Qingzheng saw the enthusiastic look in Ren Xiaosu's eyes. "Xiaosu, did you think of a plan? Tell us about it." "After we change into the uniform of the Divine Arms," Ren Xiaosu said, "let's first go back to the fob that we just left from and have a good meal there." Everyone was shocked. So the first thing to do after changing into the uniform of the Divine Arms Battalion was to return to the forward operating base to steal their meals. Li Qingzheng realized that no matter what identity Ren Xiaosu was given, he could always make use of them like it was fully within his rights to do so. All of the private troops had changed into the uniform of the Divine Arms Battalion. However, the 5 nano-soldiers put on the maintenance uniform of the private troops and blended into the group. These uniforms were originally made for mechanics and were also standard issue for every formation of the private troops of the organization. The wages of the maintenance personnel had always been relatively higher, and since some soldiers within the troops were also slightly skilled in repairing vehicles, Lu Taiyu chose to direct the salary for this job into his own pockets. As the uniforms were issued by the organization, there was no need to pay for them. But if they were sold separately, Lu Taiyu would probably embezzle the soldiers' allowance for it as well. The private soldiers had already accumulated a lot of resentment for Lu Taiyu. After all, they could not even afford to eat enough to fill their stomachs. Back when the soldiers were still at the outposts, wasn't it Lu Taiyu who ordered his subordinates to mix sand into the bags of rice? As Ren Xiaosu led Li Qingzheng and the others to the forward operating base, he said, "What are you afraid of? We still have those Divine Arms soldiers back at the campsite. What if they find out that we left the place without permission?" Li Qingzheng said in a halting fashion. "What's there to be afraid of?" Ren Xiaosu said, totally unafraid. "How do you expect 5 people to watch over nearly 1,000 people? It's only possible if we're in a dream. Since they still can't recognize everyone at the moment, it's a good opportunity for us to move around on our own. Once they understand the private troops' situation better after some time, it won't be that easy to move around on our own." Li Qingzheng realized that Ren Xiaosu was really ballsy. But Ren Xiaosu's analysis was quite reasonable. Ren Xiaosu continued, "And think about it, we're just going for a meal. Since there's no rations back at our campsite, why aren't we allowed to find food for ourselves? We're helping the officers relieve their burden. That's true. Li Qingzheng echoed, but what if the people at the FOB discover our identities? We'll be fine. Don't say anything later and just let me handle them. Ren Xiaosu said calmly. All of his teammates next to him looked at Ren Xiaosu in silence and remembered that they had really never seen him afraid of any situation before. The private troops' campsite was only several kilometers away from the FOB. They had encountered the Divine Arms Battalion not long after they left the FOB. If it weren't for the close distance, Ren Xiaosu would not have decided to take them there for a free meal. When Ren Xiaosu's group arrived at the FOB, the person at the sentry post immediately stopped them. Just as Li Qingzheng was about to step forward to negotiate peacefully, he watched Ren Xiaosu go up to him and kick him aside. How dare you stop the Divine Arms Battalion? Getting ballsy, eh? Earlier in the afternoon, they had also thought of eating at the FOB. However, they ended up getting mocked by the FOB staff who said that refugees were not fit to eat here. Now that Ren Xiaosu had the opportunity to return the favor, he would not pull any punches. When the soldier at the sentry post saw the Divine Arms Battalion's shoulder patch on Ren Xiaosu's arm, he didn't even dare to lodge a protest. Ren Xiaosu swaggered straight into the base. Li Qingzheng and the others were still a little afraid at the beginning. But as they walked in, they also started swaggering like Ren Xiaosu. When they entered the FOB's chow hall, Ren Xiaosu's group immediately smelled the aroma of food. Many of the Li Consortium's troops were heading to the front lines. But they weren't the only ones, as there were also troops returning from the front lines. So meals at the FOB were served around the clock, and even the hot water supply in the barracks was available throughout the day. While a group of cooks were busy cooking in the kitchen, Ren Xiaosu's group casually went to collect their food with stainless steel meal trays. The manager of the chow hall came over when he saw this. He said cautiously, "I'm sorry, but we haven't received advance notice of your group's arrival." Ren Xiaosu was stunned as he did not understand military regulations. As a result, he did not know that troops needed something like advance notice to enter the FOB. In that instant, Li Qingzheng and the others started sweating. However, Ren Xiaosu said coldly, "Our Divine Arms Battalion is just here to eat. Why is there a need to give you all advance notice? Are you looking down on our Divine Arms Battalion?" The group of soldiers around Ren Xiaosu looked at him in adoration. No one knew how Ren Xiaosu could say something like that so confidently. The manager of the chow hall said humbly, "No, I wouldn't dare. But can I have a look at your military ID?" Sporadic groups of soldiers were already starting to gather around them amid the commotion. Ren Xiaosu sneered and took out his Office of Special Investigations military ID. He went up to the manager of the chow hall and said, "You're the only one who can see this. Feel free to check the ID number, but watch out if you dare to leak it." When the manager of the chow hall read his military ID, he was stunned. Why was this person showing a military ID of the Office of Special Investigations while dressed in the uniform of the Divine Arms Battalion? This was getting too strange. He surreptitiously got his subordinate to do a quick check on the ID number. However, all the details displayed on the machine turned out to be genuine. The manager of the chow hall was dumbfounded. He went to inform the commander of the FOB of this matter. However, his superior was also dumbfounded. They thought this might be a very special situation, so it was better to not provoke him. Since it was just a meal, wouldn't it be better to let them finish and wash their hands of this matter? Ren Xiaosu sighed as he ate. He felt that his dual identity as member of the Divine Arms Battalion and Office of Special Investigations was really quite useful. The food in the chow hall was sumptuous and delicious. Just counting the meat dishes alone, there were more than 10 varieties. After eating and before they left the place, they even stuffed more than 10 buns into their arms. The sight of this left the chow staff in a daze. This was the fucking Divine Arms Battalion? Didn't people say the Divine Arms Battalion was treated very well? The manager of the chow hall comforted himself, "It's only 30 of them. Surely they won't take away much even if they can't finish their food, right? As Ren Xiaosu led platoon back to the campsite, Li Qingzheng and the others were burping from the feast. There should be another 4 or 5 FOBs ahead of us, so we definitely won't have to go hungry anymore. Platoon commander is almighty. The buns that we took are enough for us to eat for several days. With the soldiers in his platoon flattering him non-stop, Ren Xiaosu's vanity shot through the roof. When they got back to camp, they happened to bump into the other soldiers. When those soldiers from the other platoons saw Ren Xiaosu's group looking all energetic and in high spirits with their arms stuffed full of buns, a platoon commander got so envious he almost cried. "Can you share some of your buns with us? We've not eaten all day." Suddenly, the palace assigned a quest: help a comrade ease their hunger pangs. Ren Xiaosu was stunned for a moment. He looked at the platoon commander before him and said kindly, "Let me recommend you a good place where I guarantee you can eat your fill." When the platoon commander heard Ren Xiaosu telling him that he could eat at the forward operating base, he hesitated for a moment. What if someone at the FOB discovered their true identity? But when he looked at Ren Xiaosu's group again, he thought, isn't this a successful example right in front of me? If Ren Xiaosu's group already had their fill, anyone else wearing the Divine Arms uniform would also be able to do the same. The platoon commander said sincerely, "Thank you, my brother." Gratitude received from Wang Dingguo, +1. Quest complete. Awarded basic skill duplication scroll. When Ren Xiaosu received this gratitude token on top of the notification from the palace for the quest's completion, an idea suddenly came to him. Just as that platoon commander was about to take his men to get food, they were stopped by Ren Xiaosu. Ren Xiaosu said in seriousness, "Aren't the rest of you going to thank me?" The platoon commander was stunned at first, but he hurriedly got his men to thank Ren Xiaosu. The private soldiers were starving badly. As the information provided by Ren Xiaosu really helped with their survival issues, most of their gratitude was expressed sincerely. It was so sincere that it could not get any more sincere than this. All of a sudden, Ren Xiaosu received a total of 18 gratitude tokens. As a matter of fact, he had more than 400 gratitude tokens as of this moment. If he could make the others in the camp thank him as well, this new weapon might just be unlocked in the blink of an eye. Ren Xiaosu turned around and looked at Li Qingzheng. "You guys head back to the tent first and rest. There's something I need to do." Li Qingzheng wondered, "Platoon commander, what are you gonna do?" Ren Xiaosu said righteously, "Although we've had our fill, many people in our Iron 2nd Battalion are still hungry. We can't be this selfish. We have to let them know about this." Li Qingzheng was a little ashamed when he heard that from Ren Xiaosu. He suddenly felt that he couldn't compare to Ren Xiaosu as he wasn't as noble as him. Li Qingzheng took the initiative and said, "Then let's split up so that we can inform everyone a little quicker." Ren Xiaosu's expression immediately changed. "No, why all ve been working hard all day, so you should get some rest quickly. Hurry up and go to sleep. Don't tire yourselves out further." The soldiers in the platoon were almost moved to tears. They didn't realize in the past that Ren Xiaosu actually cared this much about them. Li Qingzheng thought the reason he had been relegated to the role of platoon sergeant was because he wasn't as enlightened as Ren Xiaosu was. After Ren Xiaosu compelled Li Qingzheng and the others to quickly go and rest, he started going around to each tent to inform the other platoons. The tents issued by the supply division were all large tents and were big enough for a platoon to sleep in. Ren Xiaosu went around patiently to inform the rest of the private troops. Everyone was still quite doubtful at the beginning, but when Ren Xiaosu showed them the buns in his arms, they were convinced. The platoons informed by Ren Xiaosu felt that he was such a good person, although, they did find it a little strange that he insisted they thank him. As Ren Xiaosu counted his gratitude tokens, he saw they had increased to over 900 in just an hour. This harvest of gratitude tokens was much greater than he had ever received in the past. Sure enough, in times of hunger, people's feelings for food would become especially sincere. Ren Xiaosu lifted the next tent's flap and asked, "Are you all hungry?" "I know a place." The 5 nano-soldiers in the tent quietly looked to Ren Xiaosu. Then Ren Xiaosu calmly replied with a smile, "Haha, sorry for the disturbance." He had been too careless. Every tent at this campsite looked identical to Ren Xiaosu, so how could he tell who was in them? Immediately, the nano-soldiers rushed out of the tent and shouted, "Stop right there!" What was the meaning of that? But as they had finished speaking, they discovered that many of the tent flaps on the outside were open with no one inside them. The nano-soldiers quickly went around the camp to check before gasping at the discovery that they had not even noticed that the camp was already half empty. Just then, the private soldiers who had finished eating their fill returned from the fob in groups, and some of them were even picking their teeth with toothpicks. Not only that, it was clear at a glance that they were carrying a lot of things in their arms. But the returning private soldiers were all petrified when they saw the nano-soldiers walking up to them. A nano-soldier from the Divine Arms Battalion asked coldly, "Where have you all been?" One of them answered while trembling, "We went to the fob to eat." The nano-soldier was stunned by his answer. Was it as simple as just eating? Gradually, more and more people returned after eating at the fob. In the end, all of them were punished to stand at attention in the camp. The nano-soldiers paced around these people and sneered, "Do you know what the crime is if you leave the barracks without permission?" He then slapped some of the private soldiers' buns they were carrying in their arms onto the ground, and stomped on them. You. The nano-soldier pointed at 3 of the private soldiers. "Eat the buns on the ground." The private soldiers who were singled out were afraid to backtalk. They immediately picked up the flattened buns and stuffed them into their mouths. The nano-soldier looked at them. "Who said you all could go to the fob to eat?" As soon as he finished saying that, he was shocked to find that almost everyone's gaze had landed on Ren Xiaosu. Not only that, someone even pointed out Ren Xiaosu. So did this mean that all the soldiers at the camp who went to the fob to eat were all told to do so by Ren Xiaosu? This should be easy to handle then. By punishing Ren Xiaosu alone, that would help avoid a mutiny. Actually, the officers of the Divine Arms Battalion felt helpless. If only 1 or 2 people had broken the law, they would be severely punished for it. But too many had committed the crime. What if they punished too many people and that resulted in a mutiny breaking out at the camp? Hence, the best thing to do would be to punish only one person as a warning to the others. But one of the officers of the Divine Arms Battalion could not figure out something. He looked at Ren Xiaosu and wondered, "Why did you tell the others they could eat at the fob?" Ren Xiaosu gave it a bit of thought. "Because the braised chicken cuts at the fob are delicious." The officers of the Divine Arms Battalion was speechless. While Ren Xiaosu spoke, the expression of one of the Divine Arms officers changed. He decided he would use Ren Xiaosu as a warning to the others tonight. But at this moment, Ren Xiaosu whispered to one of the Divine Arms nano-soldiers, "Can we step aside to have a word?" Puzzled, the nano-soldier went with Ren Xiaosu a ways away where Ren Xiaosu flashed his Office of Special Investigations military ID without hesitation. "I suspect that there's a spy from the Qing Consortium within our ranks, so y'all will have to cooperate with me to identify him. However, I have no clue who it might be. No one else can know about this other than the 2 of us." The nano-soldier stayed silent. Ren Xiaosu thought that since Hu Shuo and Li Shenton were plotting something major, they would definitely be more than okay to help him resolve a small matter like this. If that were the case, he might as well just pass the buck since he could do it. Tonight's turn of events upset the nano-soldier. He felt that he had to give it more careful thought. A captain of the Office of Special Investigations telling everyone to go to the fob to eat in order to flush out the Qing Consortium's spy? That didn't make any fucking sense. The Office of Special Investigations was a military unit that even the Divine Arms Battalion was afraid of. After all, not even the Divine Arms Battalion was confident enough to proclaim that no spy could infiltrate their ranks. Meanwhile, espionage was one of the most serious crimes that could happen in wartime. Ren Xiaosu patted the nano-soldier on his shoulder and said, "Well, I'm a captain. You've performed pretty well. Hurry back and get some rest quickly." The nano-soldier nodded in a daze. He silently memorized Ren Xiaosu's military ID number and planned on checking it after returning to his tent. He wanted to know if this guy was really from the Office of Special Investigations. Meanwhile, the commander of the FOB was speechless when he saw the mess in the Chow Hall. The manager of the Chow Hall broke the silence. "Sir, there is something off about this Divine Arms Battalion. Their appetite is a little too large." It wasn't only their appetite that was a little too large, but that their habit of taking some food away with them when leaving made the Chow staff a little uncomfortable. When Ren Xiaosu's group came to eat, they felt a group of 30 people wouldn't eat much anyway, so they just let them have what they wanted. However, a strange turn of events happened after that. Weren't they just here to have supper? How did it end up with all their friends coming over for supper as well? Suddenly, a soldier ran into the Chow Hall from outside. The commander of the FOB asked, "Have you found out what happened yet?" That soldier hesitated before saying, "I've reported the matter to both the Divine Arms Battalion and Office of Special Investigations." As it turns out, both sides said, "We have no right to question whatever goes on here." If they were told they couldn't question the matter, then it was as good as tacitly admitting to it. If the people who came to eat were really imposters, the higher UPS would have already kicked up a fuss and demanded them to investigate thoroughly. The commander of the FOB was unaware that the Divine Arms Battalion immediately knew upon receiving their information that the people who went to eat were only the private troops in disguise. But in order not to expose their plans, they had no choice but to admit they were their people. As for Hu Shuo, he was used to it. Actually, the commander of the Divine Arms Battalion did not care how much food these private soldiers had eaten, since they were not eating into their battalion's quota of rations anyway. What they were more bothered about was the fact that the Office of Special Investigations was actually investigating if there was a spy within their battalion's ranks. Hu Shuo had also gotten used to this. When Ren Xiaosu and the others returned to their tents, everyone wondered why he did not receive any punishment. However, no one dared to ask him about it. Actually, Ren Xiaosu had been very kind to inform them of where they could go to eat it, but they ended up betraying him in return. This made everyone feel somewhat guilty. Chen Wudi sat down in the tent and asked Ren Xiaosu, "Master, don't you blame them? You clearly helped them eat their fill, yet no one was willing to step forward and speak up for you." At the time, Chen Wudi was prepared to fight their way out together with Ren Xiaosu. But in the end, Ren Xiaosu used his Office of Special Investigations identity to defuse the situation. Ren Xiaosu thought for a moment and said, "Of course I blame them, but I also expected it." "But, Master, I couldn't feel any anger from you." Chen Wudi said softly, "I was infuriated, and I'm still infuriated. I'll probably still get infuriated whenever I think about this in the future. And those things that happened in the past too, and those evil people as well." Ren Xiaosu smiled and said, "It's all right, they can't hurt us." Chen Wudi nodded. "Master, please sleep. I'll keep watch for the first half of the night." "All right." Then Ren Xiaosu went straight to sleep. He did not have to worry about getting attacked with Chen Wudi keeping watch. In this tent, he only trusted Chen Wudi and the 8 students. Not even Li Qingzheng was trustworthy to him. The trust between him, Chen Wudi, and the students had built up little by little over time. None of them had betrayed him since the time in Stronghold 109. Of course, the most trustworthy person was still Chen Wudi. Li Qingzheng and the others looked at Ren Xiaosu and wondered how he could remain so calm. After all of tonight's events, he could still fall asleep so quickly? Chen Wudi sat cross-legged next to Ren Xiaosu and forbade anyone from approaching him. He did not allow anyone to get close to him. After daybreak, the officers of the Divine Arms Battalion continued on their journey with the entire battalion of private troops as though nothing had happened last night. The front lines at Mt. Fenji, Mt. Tantu, and Mt Shuanglong were very deep. If a battle really broke out, there was a mountain path there the Qing Consortium would have to pass through to invade the heart of the Li Consortium. Therefore, the Li Consortium had sent a large number of private troops there to fill their defensive gap and act as cannon fodder. It was said that there used to be a city north of Mt Shuanglong in the pre-cataclysm times. It was located at the intersection of three rivers where a dam used to exist upstream. However, that dam was neglected after the cataclysm. As a result, no one opened the floodgates to release the excess water until it finally burst its banks. That caused the river to change its course, turning the once prosperous city into a floodplain. In summer, the entire area would get covered by clouds and experience continuous rain due to the water cycle. Fortunately, it was winter right now. Winter had gotten colder over the days, causing some of the smaller tributaries to freeze as a result. But upon setting off, they encountered yet another problem. The real Divine Arms Battalion had already driven off in all of their military transport trucks. They had only thought about switching their vehicles and forgot the private soldiers were not trained to drive. The private soldiers here who could drive were the minority. While they were traveling by the truck, 30 of them could get in at once. If there were others on board who could drive, they could occasionally take turns at the wheel. But now that they had switched to the off-road vehicles, there were not enough drivers to go around. One of the Divine Arms officers was a little dumbfounded as he stood in front of the numerous off-road vehicles. Why were problems constantly messing up his plan? However, this Divine Arms Battalion officer was also a decisive guy. He resolutely said, "Abandon the vehicles. We'll enter the mountains on foot. Don't take the main road so that it'll look like we're trying to cover our tracks on purpose." Ren Xiaosu understood this decision. By trekking through the wilderness of the mountains, it would create a sense of secrecy. If a spy discovered these troops wearing the uniform of the Divine Arms Battalion were trying to move under the cover of the wilderness of the mountains by deliberately avoiding the main road, they might get more interested in tracking their whereabouts. But didn't he just learn how to drive? And now they were just going to abandon the vehicles on the side of the road and not use them anymore? Moreover, based on the physical fitness of these private soldiers, at least half of them were probably not going to make it to the specified destination if they really had to walk there via the wilderness of these mountains. At this moment, Chen Wudi asked, "What if we don't get discovered by the spy when we go into the wilderness of the mountains?" Ren Xiaosu nearly applauded that. "That's a good question. A spy would not wander into the mountains for no good reason. They would definitely travel on the main road with the main force, so the other possibility would be that the spy could be unaware of troops marching secretly in the mountain wilderness, due to them being too well hidden." The officer of the Divine Arms Battalion was speechless for a while. "Just do as I say." Even if Ren Xiaosu were from the Office of Special Investigations, he could not influence the Divine Arms Battalion's battle plans. He could investigate the spy, but they would still have the final say on how to fight the war. Even though the Divine Arms Battalion did not wish to offend the Office of Special Investigations, if something made their plan to fail, should the blame fall on the Office of Special Investigations or the Divine Arms Battalion? Naturally, Ren Xiaosu did not actually care about whether the Office of Special Investigations would take the blame or not. The conflict between the three organizations in the southwestern region was not something new at all. The Qing Consortium was extraordinarily well prepared as they had constructed a forward operating base and defensive fortifications in the mountains way in advance. 2 off-road vehicles were driving over from northeast of the mountains. Qing Zhen and Luolan sat in one of the vehicles and looked at the scenery outside. Qing Zhen said with a smile, "This place has to be defended well. If we lose our position here, the roads will have been built for nothing. Our enemies can simply drive straight in without any obstacles. Rest easy, we won't lose this place." Secretary Zhou sat in the front passenger seat and said coldly, "Qing Zhen, you can say we're letting you atone for your crimes by having you act as a military advisor. I hope that you will carefully consider the board's decision and stop acting recklessly." Qing Zhen said calmly with a smile, "Atone for my crimes? What crimes have I committed? The soldier driving the vehicle acted as though he were deaf. He only focused on driving and did not dare to react unusually. Meanwhile, Secretary Zhou frowned, thinking about something. After the off-road vehicle traveled for dozens of kilometers in the mountains, it finally arrived at a huge base. When they came to the sentry post, Secretary Zhou flashed his ID, and they were allowed to pass through. Qing Zhen looked at the layout of the surrounding barracks and commented, "The security here is a little lax. We've arrived. Get out." Secretary Zhou looked at Qing Zhen and said, "You probably know the combat commander here. I think he can be considered a younger brother of yours? His name is Qing Yun." "Oh." Qing Zhen nodded. "That's naughty brat. He cried a lot when we were young." Qing Yun was the person who discovered the experimentals had disappeared from Stronghold 113. After getting out of the vehicle, Qing Zhen started walking towards the command post tent. "Since I'm here as a military advisor, what happens if Qing Yun does not heed my advice? Have you ever considered this problem? If he insists on doing things his way, am I supposed to take the fall along with him?" Secretary Zhou's frown grew deeper as he said, "Don't try anything, Qing Zhen. Since he's the commanding officer of the troops, he'll definitely bear the main responsibility if something goes wrong. But as the military advisor, would you dare say that you won't be liable if any battles are lost? Both of you are working for the Qing Consortium, so I hope you can be more serious and not deliberately play a passive role." Actually, this was the most worrisome matter for the Qing Consortium Board of Directors. They felt uneasy in letting Qing Yun face the other two organizations by himself. After all, Qing Yun's combat experience was far less than Qing Zhen's. Moreover, no one in the entire Qing Consortium could match Qing Zhen when it came to wisdom in warfare. For an organization that large and filled with so many people, it was natural to think that powerful leadership figures abounded. But even throughout history, only a handful of famous leaders had ever existed in this world. And sometimes, some people were really just that exceptionally talented. But what they were more worried about was that they had been suppressing Qing Zhen too much recently. If Qing Zhen just showed up at the front lines and did not put in any effort for the war, that would also affect the overall situation. It was not that the board was being stupid by insisting on suppressing skilled people, but that they had long been accustomed to skilled people yielding to the huge machine that was the organization. An arrogant shadow had wanted to place himself above the organization. But what happened to him in the end? Didn't he also become a tool for the board after admitting defeat? But the Qing Consortium board could never have expected Qing Zhen to be so unyielding. Qing Zhen walked into the tent with a smile. Officers were trotting back and forth within the command post tent. They were all either holding intel of the latest military updates in their hands or about to carry out orders issued by Qing Yun. Everyone in the tent was stunned for a moment when they saw Qing Zhen walk in. It was like the air in the command post solidified the instant he went in. Qing Zhen greeted everyone, "There's no need to get nervous. Just get back to whatever you were doing. Luolan and I are just here to see all of you." When Qing Yun, who was standing next to the sand table one in the command post, saw Qing Zhen, his expression darkened. He looked at Secretary Zhou. "Why did you bring him here?" Secretary Zhou said calmly, "Your second uncle wanted him to come and assist you." "Assist me?" Qing Yun sneered, "I don't need a prisoner to assist me." Luolan smiled and said, "Qing Yun, do you still remember the days when you used to stick to our behinds and play in the dirt? When I was out on campaign, you were probably still wetting the bed." Secretary Zhou said angrily, "That's enough. A great change will be sweeping over the southwestern region soon, and you're still in the mood to quarrel like children here? Qing Yun, the two of them will serve as your military advisors. Brief them first, then hold a military meeting." Qing Yun gave them a look and said to his second-in-command next to him, "Inform all the commanders of the fighting forces to attend the meeting." Ultimately, Qing Yun still did not dare to disobey the board's order. Since the board sent Qing Zhen here as the military advisor, he would have to somehow cooperate with him on the surface. This way, no one could point their fingers at him even if something went wrong. During the meeting, Qing Zhen sat at the table with his eyes closed throughout. No one knew whether he was listening to the updates given by the commanders of the fighting forces. Meanwhile, Luolan sprawled out on the table and openly slept. An officer said, "We're currently garrisoned on the front lines at Mt. Daping and Mt. Xianlin. The Li Consortium and the Yang Consortium won't be so reckless to come and attack us since this war is still mainly a conflict between their two organizations." "How stupid," interrupted Qing Zhen as his eyes shot open. The command post fell silent. Qing Zhen bluntly said, "The philosophy on this battlefield is that anyone involved in the war is an enemy, other than our own. Why do you think the Li Consortium and the Yang Consortium won't take the initiative and attack us just because they're grudges with each other?" Qing Yun said coldly, "Because the Yang Consortium stole the Li Consortium's." Qing Zhen was guffawed. "That was not stolen by the Yang Consortium. It was I who stole it and gave it to the Yang Consortium. Mark my words, since we've already come all the way out here, we'll certainly be targeted by the Li Consortium. If our defenses slip up, we could very well end up becoming the priority target of the other two organizations. When that happens, they might even be willing to put aside their feud temporarily. The possibility of gaining the Qing Consortium's interests for themselves would be more than enough to tempt them." Qing Yun glared at Qing Zhen as he had been living in Qing Zhen's shadow for more than 20 years now. When he was in preschool, everyone said there was a person better than him, and that person was called Qing Zhen. When he got to elementary school, high school, or university, it was still the same. Even after entering the military, everyone was still saying that Qing Zhen was better at waging war than anyone else in the organization. But even if he hated Qing Zhen to the core, he would still sit at the same table with Qing Zhen to discuss the war, as he wanted to let the board know that he was more obedient than Qing Zhen. Qing Zhen glanced at Qing Yun, startled. "I never claimed I was the only smart one around. Luolan is also quite smart as well." Luolan was awoken by the noise. He asked sleepily, "What? What did you say?" Qing Zhen smiled and said, "I was saying that other than you and me, everyone else in this command post is stupid." Luolan sat bolt upright. "Qing Zhen is right." Qing Yun's face grew ugly in an instant. "Smart ass. But aren't you still just a prisoner?" But as soon as he finished speaking, Qing Zhen smiled at him and said, "If you're allowed to continue being the commanding officer here, the Qing Consortium will be done for. With immediate effect, I shall take over command of all the fighting forces on the front lines. Secretary Zhou, you can go back and tell those old fogies to wait until after the war has ended if they have any opinions on this." As his voice trailed off, the second-in-command next to Qing Yun suddenly unholstered his pistol and pulled the trigger while pointing it at Qing Yun's head. The gunshot was so loud that the other officers in the tent nearly screamed in fright. However, their screams didn't even make it out of their mouths before they swallowed them down. Qing Yun's trusted aides immediately unholstered their pistols to fight back, but they realized 5 people in the tent had already drawn their pistols at the same time and were pointing them at them. Everyone in the tent fell silent. At this moment, they remembered the atrocities Qing Zhen had committed in the past. This was the craziest person of all in the Qing Consortium. Qing Yun had carefully played his every card on the table to earn the appreciation of the board. But he could never have expected that Qing Zhen would just flip the table. The silent tiger of the Qing Consortium had finally returned to the mountains. Secretary Zhou was in shock. "Qing Zhen! How dare you murder the commanding officer of the fighting forces? And how dare you plant your people around Qing Yun?" Qing Zhen grinned and remarked, "Secretary Zhou, I might have planted some of my people around you too." Secretary Zhou was so frightened he ran out of the command post and jumped into the off-road vehicle. He did not even dare to take his driver with him and just drove off by himself. "It's peaceful again." Luolan stretched and laughed heartily. "So how are we going to fight this war?" Qing Zhen said, let's straighten out our internal affairs first. After taking a look at the sand table, he said, concentrate the defensive lines and don't scatter our troops out to MT dapping. The recon forces are to continue doing their job on the battlefield to prevent any ambushes by the Li Consortium and the Yang Consortium. Heavy weapons will not be of much use if their usage is restricted to the mountains, and they're not as good as us when it comes to paving roads. However, we should still be careful of the nano-soldiers these two organizations have. Qing Zhen continued giving out instructions. Although we haven't seen what a nano-soldier looks like, we're likely going to be considered a vulnerable target since we're the only combatant among the three organizations without nano-soldiers. If we reveal any signs of weakness first, this war could get a little tricky. So what we should do now isn't to invade the others, rather, don't make any mistakes. As this chessboard was too big, only the players that made the least mistakes would last until the end. Qing Zhen looked at Luo Lan. I want you to go to the Yang Consortium tomorrow and negotiate with them. Tell them we'll be eliminating the Li Consortium first. Luo Lan nodded, but he heard Qing Zhen say to another person, I want you to go to the Li Consortium and negotiate with them. Tell them we can help them take out the Yang Consortium's defenses at MT Ping. You'll have to set off immediately. If you're successful in the negotiations, I'll make sure you get recognized for your meritorious service upon returning. Although this person was Qing Yun's trusted aide, Qing Zhen did not kill him and even entrusted him with an important responsibility. After this person left, Luo Lan lowered his voice and asked curiously, why didn't you have me approach the Li Consortium? Because the Li Consortium is already out of their minds. Qing Zhen said softly, besides, they do have a real lunatic there, so anyone who goes will die. Luo Lan finally understood. It turned out Qing Zhen knew right from the start they would not be able to join forces with the Li Consortium. By sending Qing Yun's trusted aide to the Li Consortium, it was as good as sending him to his death. Qing Zhen said, furthermore, he's probably scared to the bone right now, so the forces he took with him will definitely be those he trusts most and are likely to be a part of Qing Yun's inner circle. By sending them to the Li Consortium, the problem will take care of itself. Luo Lan's eyes lit up. Brilliant! Qing Zhen suddenly said with a sigh, I was wrong just now. Luo Lan was taken aback. What were you wrong about? Qing Zhen looked at Luo Lan. Actually, I'm the only smart one around here. You don't count. Luo Lan was confused. Then Qing Zhen looked at the other officers and said, start thinking about how we should concentrate our defensive lines. I want to see a new strategy in place on the sand table tomorrow morning. Someone hesitated for a moment before saying, an elite troop of soldiers have already been sent to the Li Consortium's territory. Qing Yun was planning on intercepting the Li Consortium's Divine Arms Battalion based on the intel they relayed back. This Divine Arms Battalion is being too careless by acting independently without coordinating with their other fighting forces. Therefore, Qing Yun thought this would be an opportunity to nip the threat in the bud. Qing Zhen was taken aback. When did he send our troops out? And where are they now? It's been a week since they set off. They were headed to the front lines at MT Fenji and MT Shuanglong, that officer said. Qing Zhen said, recall them. There's no need for such an unnecessary move at this moment. That officer hesitated before saying, I'm afraid it's too late. Ren Xiaosu and the others were trekking in the mountains on foot at this moment. The snow on the ground had not melted yet because of the low temperatures in the mountains. It was very difficult for them to march in such conditions, yet it started snowing yet again. Sniffing back mucus, Li Qingzheng said, if I knew it would be like this, I would have gone into hiding back then. I thought I could enjoy my days after joining the private army, but life now is even worse than before. I really miss the days when we were at the outpost where we led a carefree life. Next to him, a soldier from another platoon asked curiously, was it very comfortable at the outpost for y'all? Why did it feel so miserable for us? Li Qingzheng immediately shut his mouth after hearing someone else chip in with this question. He couldn't possibly tell them they had wolves sending all that game to them at their outpost, right? As the snowstorm got heavier, Ren Xiaosu looked up at the sky. When snowfall becomes this heavy in the wilderness of the mountains, it tends to keep snowing for at least a week. We can't march any further. I'm afraid that if we keep moving, we'll end up losing our way. The Divine Arms officer in front turned around and said, "What's there to be afraid of? We're equipped with GPS devices, so we won't lose our way. Everyone is to obey our orders right now. We're going to keep marching forward." After Lu Taiyu, the commander of the Iron 2nd Battalion, was punched and kicked, he fell into a coma and then started running a high fever. Without him, no one in the Iron 2nd could call the shots. So everyone had no choice but to follow the Divine Arms Battalion's orders and continue marching. Although Ren Xiaosu's identity was very unique, the soldiers from the Divine Arms Battalion had spoken to him about this before. If their plans were affected, no one would be able to bear the consequences. In such situations, even being a member of the Office of Special Investigations would not allow him to violate this military order. For a moment, Ren Xiaosu even wanted to convince himself that since he had already infringed on the Custom Division's authority by investigating smuggling, it wouldn't be a big deal if he also took over the role of the Divine Arms Battalion. However, this was still not the right time. The snow in the mountains gradually reached their feet, then their ankles, and finally, their knees. This heavy snowfall came so fast and unexpectedly that the Divine Arms officer even started to waver on whether they should continue marching. When he looked at his GPS device and saw it was still functioning normally, he felt a little reassured. However, there was only a narrow dirt road in the mountains, and it was currently covered in snow. Someone who was not careful enough sprained their ankle when they accidentally stepped onto a rock. Fortunately, the sprain was not too serious as the snow was relatively soft. Ren Xiaosu walked against the blizzard to get to the front of the troops and shouted to the officer of the Divine Arms Battalion, "We can't walk any further. The snow is too deep for everyone to move." But that Divine Arms officer didn't care. Since the nanomachines in their bodies were constantly providing them with powered assistance, they did not have much difficulty walking in the snow. Besides, the nanomachines' battery life would definitely be sufficient to support them for the entire way if they were going to slowly walk like this. Moreover, they were carrying wireless chargers on their backs. The wireless chargers were standard issue for the combat troops of the Divine Arms Battalion and had to be carried around during a war. A while ago, the Divine Arms officer was adamant about marching even though it was snowing heavily. If he suddenly changed his mind, wouldn't he be embarrassing himself? One of the other Divine Arms officers said coldly, "If we can't get to the specified destination on time, are you going to shoulder the responsibility?" Ren Xiaosu did not bother contending with them and just said, "Have y'all seen how a wolf pack moves in the snow? We need to keep rotating the people at the front to create a trail so that it'll be much easier for those at the back to walk. It'll be easier to advance if every platoon takes turns creating a path in the snow." After hearing this, the Divine Arms officers turned around and looked at the exhausted private soldiers behind them. The officers looked at one another until one of them said, "We'll do as you described. Every platoon is to walk at the front for 15 minutes each. No one is allowed to slack off." After the order was passed down, the entire group of marching troops went from moving in a swarm to forming a single long and narrow file in the snow. Ren Xiaosu heaved a sigh of relief. By doing this, it would at least relieve some of their burdens and help the troops march in a more orderly fashion. Suddenly, the voice from the palace in his mind said, "Quest, help your comrades who have fallen behind keep up with the troops." This quest dumbfounded Ren Xiaosu as no one had fallen behind yet. Besides, these bastards had betrayed him before, so why should he help them? All of a sudden, Ren Xiaosu saw someone in the troops behind him run off towards the mountain. He knew something was not right. This was a deserter who could no longer bear it and was trying to run away. Before now, Lu Taiyu had the support of the reinforced company to help him oversee the private troops and prevent anyone from becoming deserters. But now that Lu Taiyu was in a coma, the soldiers of the reinforced company couldn't care less about maintaining order. Furthermore, they still had to take turns carrying Lu Taiyu. Ren Xiaosu felt that these people might even abandon him along the way and become deserters themselves. As Ren Xiaosu watched that man run off to the nearby mountains, he could only think of one thing. Would a deserter count as someone who's fallen behind? Of course it fucking would. A lot of people noticed that deserter as well. Before the others felt tempted to follow suit, they saw Ren Xiaosu dash over. His speed in the snow was unhindered and as fast as running on flat ground. Within half a minute, Ren Xiaosu caught the deserter and even took his weapons away from him. As Ren Xiaosu dragged this deserter back by his legs, he earnestly tried to comfort him. It's not safe in the mountains. What if something happens to you after you've escaped into the mountains? The deserter was in despair. I won't try to escape anymore, so please let go of me. I'll stand up and walk by myself. A deep trail was carved out in the snow when Ren Xiaosu dragged the deserter back by his legs. Actually, Ren Xiaosu had not meant to get rough with him. Although the deserter had outed him yesterday, it wasn't worthwhile for Ren Xiaosu to do anything to him. And there was nothing wrong with being a deserter either. All the soldier wanted was to live. So Ren Xiaosu only took away the deserter's weapons when he caught him and did not hit him at all. But was Ren Xiaosu in the wrong for wanting to complete his quest? He wasn't in the wrong either. There was another point that Ren Xiaosu was not lying about. If anyone ventured into the mountains alone in such heavy snowfall, they would die. At the very least, he would never have ventured into the mountains during a violent blizzard. Ren Xiaosu said to the others, "Everyone, keep walking. Don't be a deserter, ya hear me?" Then Ren Xiaosu went over to the reinforced company and said, "Although the Iron Second's commander is in a coma, y'all have to assume your duties, understand?" The soldiers of the reinforced company who were carrying Lu Taiyu were a little dumbfounded. Why had this refugee taken control of them? Ren Xiaosu looked at the Divine Arms officer and said, "If anyone escapes at this time and your plans get discovered by enemy troops, all that you've done up till now will have been for naught." The Divine Arms officer also thought what he said was true. They turned to the reinforced company's soldiers and said, "Go keep an eye on the troops. If anyone attempts to desert, shoot them on the spot." Li Qingzheng looked at Ren Xiaosu's back and said with emotion, "Although I don't know what our platoon commander is up to, his ability to sway people is amazing." But at this moment, someone in the troops suddenly fell down in the snow looking utterly exhausted. The people who passed by did not even bother looking at him. Even his comrades from the same platoon were not planning on helping him. Ren Xiaosu gave a mental sigh. He had thought his quest would be completed after he had caught the deserter, but he had not expected this quest to turn out more difficult than the ones he had before. Before he could finish lamenting, another person in the troops fainted. These people were not pretending. After all, the Divine Arms Battalion had just given the order that if anyone deliberately tried to delay the mission, they would be shot. Ren Xiaosu walked over and firemen carried the man who had fainted. He said to Chen Wudi, "I guess we're helping people in need. Piggyback the other person and walk ahead." Ren Xiaosu had been waiting for the palace to confirm that he had completed the quest, but it did not say anything even after a long time. However, Chen Wudi appeared to be quite happy. Doing good deeds together and being a hero with his master felt quite good and fun to him. After a while, Chen Wudi was even carrying two people on his shoulders. Ren Xiaosu could only explain to the others that his friend was born with great strength. Although it was rare to see people who could carry two people at once, quite a few refugees at the coal mines outside the stronghold could do it, so it was still explainable. But if he carried more than that, Ren Xiaosu would probably not be able to explain it. When the lead officer of the Divine Arms Battalion saw this, he said in surprise, "The Office of Special Investigations is really doing all it can just to guard against spies. No wonder all the other fighting forces in the military are afraid of them." While the soldiers ate their field rations, someone suddenly complained, they're really inhumane for making us march in such accursed weather. But what can you do about it? One of the soldiers took a bite of the cold, hard bun and said, if I hadn't stocked up on some buns last night, I would have starved to death along the way today. It's impossible to keep moving in this weather if we have no food to eat. Hey, you don't say. Seeing Lu Taiu's current plight can't make me any happier. Someone said, all of our pay and entitlements must have been embezzled by that bastard, Lu Taiu. But I still feel like it isn't enough. Why didn't that Divine Arms officer just kick him to death? One of the soldiers said angrily. We're still dozens of clicks away from the nearest mountain. MT Tantu and MT Fenji and MT Shuanglong are even further north. I wonder when we'll reach our destination since it's snowing so heavily now, someone said in total despair. Moreover, those bastards from the reinforced company are even starting to keep an eye on us now, so there's no chance that we can escape. Forget about it, one of them said. Escape? It requires tremendous courage in this weather just to head into the mountains alone to seek a quick death. There's still a chance of survival if we stick with everyone. But once you become a deserter, death is certain. Let me give y'all a suggestion. Someone chuckled. When we set off again later, just pretend you've fainted. As soon as you faint, that idiot called Chen Wudi will come over and carry you. We can walk much less that way. But as soon as he finished speaking, he felt a chill creep up behind his back, causing him to shudder even more in this already cold weather. But when he turned around to look, everything seemed perfectly normal. That's strange. What's going on? As Ren Xiaosu was furtively cutting pieces of cured meat to share with Chen Wudi and the students, he noticed Chen Wudi looked dismayed. Wudi, what's the matter? Chen Wudi whispered, Master, I've regained my super hearing. Ren Xiaosu was stunned. But Wudi, the great sage doesn't have that power. Chen Wudi replied, well, the version of the great sage that I am does. Ren Xiaosu nodded. All right, whatever you say. Honestly, Ren Xiaosu did not even know which version of the great sage Chen Wudi was anymore. How amazing it was to be able to patch oneself like that. Master, Chen Wudi said dejectedly, I don't want to help them anymore. Why's that? Ren Xiaosu asked, what did you hear? They said that they're going to pretend to faint when we set off again so that the idiotic Chen Wudi will carry them, Chen Wudi answered. Ren Xiaosu's eyes narrowed at the answer. Who said that? Chen Wudi did not mention the man. Master, you'd kill the man if I told you. What's the big deal with killing some people? Ren Xiaosu sneered. Master, Chen Wudi said, I just don't understand why some people in this world are so evil. They'll get their comeuppance, Ren Xiaosu said as he looked at the private soldiers around him with a dark expression. For the first time in recent days, he was keen to kill someone. When they resumed their journey in the afternoon, Ren Xiaosu was silent as he walked along with the troops. Suddenly, 5 people dropped to the ground at the same time. Ren Xiaosu slowly walked up to these people and seemingly stepped on the back of a person's hand accidentally. The man trembled in pain but pretended to remain unconscious and did not open his eyes no matter what. Ren Xiaosu said to Li Qingzheng with a smile, get me a rope. We have some in our field packs. Okay. Li Qingzheng did not know why Ren Xiaosu wanted a rope, but he still got it for him. He watched Ren Xiaosu tie the rope around the calves of these 5 people who were on the ground. Then, he started dragging them forward in the snow. When one of those people on the ground sensed something was wrong, he wanted to quickly get up and say that he had regained his consciousness. But as soon as he got up, Ren Xiaosu kicked his chest. The man coughed up blood on the spot. Everyone turned around and looked at Ren Xiaosu's back as he stood in the snow. Snowflakes in the air swirled around him, and he was full of killing intent. He said calmly, did I say that you could get up? In response, someone on the ground got up and shouted, we're going to die if we get dragged like this in the snow by him. Let's fight him. But when they tried to stand up, Ren Xiaosu kicked all of them back into the snow. These people could only feel a foot as hard as steel when the kicks landed on their chests, while the people watching could not even see how fast Ren Xiaosu's movements were. But they only thought the snowfall blurred their vision. Ren Xiaosu turned around and grinned at the others. "You're all adults, so walk on your own, got it?" Chen Wudi stared dumbfoundedly at Ren Xiaosu while standing in the snow. "Master," as the young man's figure faced the blizzard in the wilderness of the mountains, he smiled at Chen Wudi and said, "Master will help you get back at them." Then Ren Xiaosu dragged the 5 of them behind him through the snow with the rope. Li Qingzheng went up to him. "I'll help you pull." Zhang Wu's 8 students also came over. "Monitor, we'll help too." In this moment, no one in the troops dared to speak up for these 5 men. Those in the know all knew Ren Xiaosu had probably realized the 5 of them were deliberately trying to take advantage of Chen Wudi's kindness. Sometimes, there were just some people who stood head and shoulders above millions of others. Before Ren Xiaosu had revealed himself, everyone thought he was just a normal young man. But in this moment, his ruthlessness made everyone terrified of him. They knew Ren Xiaosu was going to drag all 5 of them through the snow until they died. When the Divine Arms officer standing furthest ahead of the troops watched this occur, he was a little dumbfounded. "I heard there were many ruthless people in the Office of Special Investigations. I didn't believe it before, but I do now." Another Divine Arms officer muttered, "When we meet up with the others after the war ends, we must tell them not to ever mess with those from the Office of Special Investigations. Their ways are extremely cruel." In fact, Ren Xiaosu had never openly admitted to his master-disciple relationship with Chen Wudi. After all, he had never taught him anything before, and the way he became his disciple was also inexplicable. But Ren Xiaosu really liked Chen Wudi addressing him as master. Chen Wudi was just like a pure, flawless crystal. Who wouldn't enjoy getting along with someone like that? As a result, Ren Xiaosu had long since acknowledged this master-disciple relationship in his mind. But today, Ren Xiaosu was not actually that insistent on standing up for Chen Wudi. All he wanted was to help Chen Wudi hold on to his last ray of light. However, no one else dared to faint for the rest of the afternoon as they were all afraid they would get dragged to their deaths in the snow by Ren Xiaosu. "Let's set up camp here," one of the officers of the Divine Arms Battalion said. "We'll continue on our march after the snow has stopped." It was not the time to think about saving face. If they continued marching, all of them might just end up dying in the snow. If that happened, they would similarly not be able to accomplish their mission since they wouldn't even be able to get to Mt Shuanglong. That officer of the Divine Arms Battalion felt he could still keep marching, but the private soldiers were simply not fit enough to go on. When they learned they could finally set up camp and get some rest, all of the private soldiers seemed like they had been injected with a new lease on life. They were trembling in the cold weather and even wanted to sit down in the snow, but Ren Xiaosu roared at them, "Get up and set up your tents. How can y'all think of resting when you don't have a tent to take shelter in? Do you want to die out here in the snow?" Actually, they could also rest in the snow without setting up a tent. All they had to do was dig a snow pit and bury themselves in it. This wasn't some derisive suggestion but a genuine solution if tents were not available while trekking through deep snow. Most people would think it would be colder in a snow pit, but being in one actually helps keep a person warm, because the surroundings outside of a snow pit are even colder than the inside. Ren Xiaosu had heard from Zhang Jinglan that some human settlements in the far north would build igloos to keep themselves warm in the winter. Everyone struggled to get up and were using their last bit of strength to set up their tents when faced with the threat of death. However, some of the platoons were in terrible shape. In order to conserve their energy along the way, they had even thrown away their tents at some point. If they could manage to squeeze into other people's tents, it wouldn't be so bad. But if the others did not share their tents, they would have to dig snow pits and gamble on whether they would be able to endure the cold in there. Ren Xiaosu ordered Li Qingzheng and the others, "I'll set up the tent while y'all go and gather some firewood from the ground. If you can't find any, Tree branches will do too. We have to get a campfire going so that we can keep ourselves warm. Have a bowl of hot porridge, each of you. Otherwise, we won't be able to bear it for much longer. All right. Li Qingzhen's face was flushed from the cold. Leave it to me. Follow me, brothers. Let's go and collect some firewood. Branches that were collected from trees would produce a lot of choking smoke when burned. But this was nothing compared to having a campfire to warm themselves with. At this moment, the voice from the palace in Ren Xiaosu's mind said, "Quest complete. Awarded basic skill duplication scroll." It wasn't until this moment that his quest was finally completed. This was probably the hardest standard quest he had ever done. At present, Ren Xiaosu had 2 basic skill duplication scrolls on him. But he didn't intend to use them since there was no target nearby for him to learn from. But if he met Hu Shuo again, he could probably give it a try. Although the basic skill duplication scroll couldn't copy superpowers, Hu Shuo must have some skills that would prove useful for Ren Xiaosu. Even if he was just trying his luck, he could probably still get something good from him. But the palace was not finished as it continued. Side quest complete. A new product, seeds, has been unlocked for purchase in the vending machine. Ren Xiaosu's eyes lit up. His patience for this side quest had finally paid off. It felt like it had taken such a long time for it to be completed. But upon recounting the days carefully, he realized it was only the 2nd day of the new year today. He had a look inside the palace and saw the vending machine standing quietly within it. A new transparent window had appeared next to the explosive poker slot. There were some seeds scattered within the window. But to Ren Xiaosu's surprise, they all looked somewhat different from each other. Could it be that different plants would grow from different seeds? The newly unlocked window slot was just like a candy box in a grocery store. The colorful packaging represented different flavors while different colors of seeds represented different uses. He placed a gratitude token into the slot and watched a crimson seed about the size of a thumb get dispensed into the pickup compartment at the bottom. As Ren Xiaosu held it in his hand, the palace did not explain what this item was for. Do I have to plant it before I know what it does? Ren Xiaosu wondered. But more importantly, shouldn't the palace at least tell me what kind of environment it grows in? It had to have magical properties since it was a product of the palace. However, he would have to test it for himself. For example, Ren Xiaosu also had to discover how to activate explosive poker by himself. If he had not managed to do so, they would have remained bog-standard playing cards. What should he do now? Should he try planting it in the ground? What if this seed could germinate and sprout immediately? In this winter weather, how great would it be if the plant that grew from the seed bore fruit or something immediately? Ren Xiaosu had always had great expectations of the side quest rewards awarded by the palace. They were items that basically ignored the laws of nature. Ren Xiaosu said to Chen Wudi, "Keep watch here at the tent. When they get back, tell them that I spotted a small wild boar and that I'm planning to catch it for our dinner tonight. If I come back late, just improvise and make up an excuse." "Okay." Chen Wudi nodded. Ren Xiaosu headed out into the snow alone. As he walked further and further, he felt that he might have been too hasty to tell Chen Wudi to improvise a reason for his disappearance. He headed further north to look for a suitable location to experiment with the seed and find out just how magical it was. He kept heading north until he found a spot that was slightly downwind. Then he started digging up the snow and soil before planting the crimson seed. SOOV as Ren Xiaosu patiently waited, he saw the seed he had just planted suddenly sprout. Bramble grew outwards as the thorny vines spread out dozens of meters across the snow before gradually stopping. If Ren Xiaosu cleared away the snow on the ground, he would see the red bramble spread out on the ground like a spider web where it laid in wait for its prey. At this moment, the plant connected with Ren Xiaosu's consciousness like it did for explosive poker. Ren Xiaosu was shocked when he realized that this plant was extremely aggressive. If it were not controlled by him, it would attack any creature that came near to it. What was this? Ren Xiaosu had thought this plant could bear fruit that could be eaten, but it turned out to be an attack plant. No, rather than an attack plant, it was more appropriate to call it a defensive type. If Ren Xiaosu and the others went and lived in the forested mountains in the future, they would not have to be afraid of any wild animals as long as he planted this thing in their surroundings. As Ren Xiaosu looked at the other colored seeds in the palace, he wondered what kind of abilities they had. Surely one of them had to be edible, right? After some thought, he placed an additional 5 gratitude tokens into the vending machine to trade for 5 seeds all at once. Then he planted them in the soil at long distance from each other. As Chen Wudi sat in the tent and waited, Li Qingzheng asked, "Wudi, where did your master go?" Chen Wudi thought for a moment and said, "My master went out to catch a wild boar for our dinner." Li Qingzheng asked, "Then why isn't he back yet?" Chen Wudi gave it some thought. "The boar probably doesn't agree to it."